Thank you. I will call to order a meeting of the Wilsonville City Council for our work session, part of our meeting, February 23rd at 5:42 p.m. And I'll start by a review of agenda and items on consent. I wanted to point out that I found a correction in the minutes, so we're going to pull the minutes from the consent agenda. Does anyone else have any items, comments? Okay, hearing none. Any councilor concerns? Seeing none, we'll move into our pre-council work session, prohibited camping code update project with our city attorney, Ms. Gal Hinman.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. Amanda Guile Hinman, City Attorney. We are going to have sort of a bifurcated presentation for you today. First off, I'm going to introduce Vahid Brown and Adam Brown from Clackamas County. They're going to talk to you a little bit about what the county is doing and some of the programs that they have and some of the advances they're making on the issue of helping people who are experiencing houselessness. And then once they're done with their presentation, I am going to jump in with my presentation on prohibited camping and some of the policy considerations for that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vahid and Adam.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Fitzgerald, council people. I'm Vahid Brown, he, him pronouns. I'm the Housing Services Manager at Health, Housing and Human Services.
And good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having us here. Adam Brown, I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director for Health, Housing, and Human Services.
Yeah, and thanks for having us. In a second, I'm going to share a screen and walk through a presentation about the work that we are engaged in the housing and homelessness space. I'm going to kind of provide an update on the Affordable Housing Bond and the implementation of the Affordable Housing Bond and new developments that are currently open and slated to be open soon. And I will talk a little bit about the implementation of the Supportive Housing Services measure and the really exciting new work that's being funded with that measure. And then I'll close with an update on Built for Zero. I think that the council was interested in our work related to Built for Zero. So I'm going to say a little bit about that and then leave some time if there's any questions. So if it's all right, I'll go ahead and launch my slides. Let's see. Is it not wanting me to do that? Try that again. There we go. All right, is that showing for everyone?
Looks great.
Great. All right, so I'm going to start with an update on the bond, the Metro Affordable Housing Bond. Let's see. Let advance. There we go. So the outlined blue area is the part of Clackamas County that is within the Metro Service District. And you see here the 7 current developments that are either completed, under construction, or nearing initiation of construction. Hillside Park, Fuller Station Apartments, Good Shepherd Village, Tukwila Springs, Maple Apartments, Merrillhurst Commons, and Lake Grove. We are well on our way to exceeding all of our goals related to the Affordable Housing Bond implementation, both in the number of units as well as in the number of units below to serve households who earn below 30% of the area median income and family size units. So the goals are in that blue band on the top of this table. These were our goals for our local implementation strategy for implementation of the bond. And at the bottom is our total unit production that we're slated to achieve with just these developments that are either complete in construction or closing this year or next year. Tukwila Springs is complete and fully leased. That's in Gladstone. That is entirely permanent supportive housing for folks who are earning less than 30% of area median income, have long histories of homelessness, and have 1 or more disabling conditions. And a quarter of those units are reserved or are prioritized for households that identify as Indigenous or Native American, and they receive supportive services from the Native American Rehabilitation Association. Fuller Station Apartments is also open and leased, and there are 25 units of permanent supportive housing in that project that are with supportive services provided by Clackamas Women's Services. And the remaining projects are under construction or nearing close.
Excuse me, Vahid, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Back just to understand the types of use under Fuller Station Apartments, I believe you said 25% are for under the median in, or describe again what types of uses comprise the 99 units, please.
Yes. So within the 99 units, so all of the 99 units are affordable to households who are earning less than 80% of area median income overall. And within those, a subset of those 99 units are 30 units that are reserved for people who are households who are making less than 30% of area median income.
Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome. I'm going to advance the slide here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the implementation of the supportive housing services measure, or this is going to be the bulk of my presentation. The supportive housing services measure, as you know, was passed in 2020 by voters in the metro region. It's two taxes: a tax on high income earners and businesses that earn more than $5 million in annual gross receipts within the metro region. This is a game-changing revenue source for Clackamas County. Prior to the measure's implementation or its passage, Clackamas County received and had at its disposal less than $10 million a year to fund our response to the housing crisis in our county. The whole range of homelessness response efforts was, funded with less than $10 million a year. And the supportive housing services measure brings to Clackamas County more than $40 million in additional funds to address this crisis in our community. So it's a more than fourfold increase in our ability to respond to the most vulnerable residents in the county who are experiencing homelessness. So we are in year 2 of implementation of this program. It is seeing a dramatic and significant expansion in all types of services, and we're building a robust continuum of services and a continuum of care, a system of care for very vulnerable low-income residents in the county who are struggling to afford housing in our community. Last spring, we launched 6 procurements at once that altogether amounted to more than $8 million in awards and contracts. That was the single largest procurement of housing services in Clackamas County's history. That in one round, we issued contracts with a total value about equal to what we would typically spend in an entire year to respond to this crisis. So that, as of now, the supportive housing services measure is funding 23 new contracts spanning this continuum of services, and I'll talk about that from street outreach to permanent supportive housing and everything in between. And we've also just recently completed 3 procurements to add additional services and programs for youth experiencing homelessness, as well as additional supportive housing case management services for our households receiving permanent supportive housing services. And we've launched a new rapid rehousing program, which is meant for to be a short-term intervention for low-income households that just need a few months of rent assistance to regain their housing and get back on their feet. So as I mentioned, we're establishing and launching a full continuum, starting with street outreach. And Clackamas County has historically not had street outreach programs to meet people where they are in the community who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Now we do. We have 6 agencies engaged in street outreach now with supportive housing services funding. These are meant, to connect with people who are unsheltered, who do not have, who are sleeping in a place not meant for human habitation, to meet them, develop relationship, address their safety on the streets needs in the moment, and that might be provision of survival gear like warm clothing and food, and really it's about relationship development and connecting households to our programs and services so we can move them off of the streets and into transitional housing or permanent housing. And our outreach programs are mobile, They're site-based at the Father's Heart Street Ministry in Oregon City and the Clackamas Service Center off of 82nd. And they're pop-up. So Love One, in partnership with the Father's Heart, does pop-up shower and laundry events throughout the county to connect with folks who are experiencing homelessness. Our outreach partners are also critical components of our emergency response efforts. When in wildfire or in very cold or hot weather, our outreach partners help us reach out to the community and identify people experiencing homelessness who need to be connected with life-saving shelter in those circumstances. Safety off the streets is the next step in our continuum. So this is one of the things that our outreach providers are helping us do, but we're also doing this through coordinated entry and in other means. And this is shelter, emergency shelter, and transitional housing programs. And the county is investing significantly in what has historically been a gap in Clackamas County. We have not been a county that has provided year-round emergency shelter for people experiencing homelessness. We have historically had very limited shelter infrastructure, pretty much only for people fleeing domestic violence, and some small programs for families with children, and the Veterans Village for veterans experiencing homelessness. But now with the Supportive Housing Services measure, and recently with the Turnkey grant, we're significantly expanding that infrastructure and are able to provide safety off the streets for pretty much anyone, single adult households, and just the general population of people experiencing homelessness. As of now, the Supportive Housing Services funding is supporting 139 units or beds of emergency and transitional housing managed by 6 different providers, community-based organizations. All of these programs are connected to permanent housing supports. So we balance our expansion of infrastructure for safety off the streets with expansion in permanent housing resources and connections to those permanent housing resources. Shelter should not be a dead end. It should not be somewhere, getting someone off of the streets and into a transitional housing or shelter environment is a resource best used when there's a next step pretty much immediately available. So as soon as someone is referred into a shelter or a transitional housing program, we connect them with a housing navigator who identifies the household's barriers, what their needs are, and helps them prepare and move into permanent housing as soon as possible. Our goal across our system is that households are spending an average of 45 days in emergency shelter or transitional housing before transitioning into permanent housing. And last week, the Board of County Commissioners approved the purchase of a 110-room hotel with the Project Turnkey 2.0 grant, which will be dedicated to transitional housing. So this will be a significant expansion again of that critical infrastructure in our continuum. Permanent supportive housing. So I mentioned the housing navigation that's connected with people in shelter or transitional housing. That's a critical component of our continuum. And the far end of our continuum is permanent supportive housing. Not all of our housing placements are PSH or permanent supportive housing. Some housing placements are just rent assistance, some subsidy for low-income households that need that assistance for a period of time. But for some, people who have long histories of homelessness and have disabling conditions, people who are defined under HUD as chronically homeless, but really for us, these are just the most vulnerable members of our community that need ongoing support and care. Permanent supportive housing is a combination of deeply affordable housing plus supportive services, case management, wraparound services, which can mean a lot of things, and it's really dependent on what the household needs. So we fund our providers that provide these supportive housing services to be able to meet the needs of any household, regardless of what those are, whether they need to be connected to employment services, behavioral health services, recovering Social Security benefits, whatever it might be. Permanent supportive housing is the evidence-based best practice for resolving chronic homelessness and ending the homelessness of people who have those long histories of unsheltered homelessness and disabling conditions. Typically, before the supportive housing services measure was passed, Clackamas County would we had very limited permanent supportive housing resources. And in any given year, we would place between 15 and 35 households in a year in permanent supportive housing. In January of this year, we made 65 placements into permanent supportive housing in 1 month. That's about double what we would typically do in a year in a single month in January of this year. Since July of 2021 until December of 2022, with the supportive housing services funded programs, 385 people were placed into permanent supportive housing, which is more than 10 times as many as we would typically place in a year prior to the supportive housing services measure. So this is what I mean really when I say this is a game-changing revenue source for the county. It's really saving lives of some of the most vulnerable people in Clackamas County. We're also, expanding our overall system and the support and coordination that we provide to these various community-based organizations that are on contract with us. We brought new agencies to the county, so we've grown the family of providers that are out in our community working with people experiencing homelessness. We also fund our cornerstone agencies that have been here for a long time, but we also brought many new agencies who have not previously provided services, housing services in Clackamas County, including 6 culturally specific agencies. Clackamas County has historically lacked culturally specific services for people experiencing homelessness, and now we don't. We've filled that gap and made good on a commitment in our local implementation plan to do so. We're also providing, our staff is providing support and coordination activities for all of these new providers and their many talented caseworkers. This picture is of a housing first aid training. We conduct these in-person trainings on an ongoing regular basis. We train all of our providers in the data entry that's required, in best practices for case management and service delivery, and we've procured for technical assistance and are funding additional technical assistance support to many of our agencies. Some of our agencies are small and emerging and have not previously received funding from a government contract. So we're walking alongside them to help them become kind of the robust organizations that they need to be to receive these government funds. And we're making progress on the Built for Zero initiative, and I know that the City Council was interested in this initiative. I'll transition to there. Built for Zero. This is a national initiative. It's led by a nonprofit headquartered in New York City called Community Solutions. About over 100 cities and counties in the United States have joined the Built for Zero initiative. It's really about having quality data and establishing processes to have a real-time understanding of who all is experiencing homelessness in a given community, who is the most vulnerable within that universe of people, and what are the most effective ways of getting to what we call functional zero. So the Built for Zero initiative provides technical support to our staff, which we then provide to our community-based organizations, that is allowing us to assemble what's called a by name list, which is kind of like what it sounds. It's a list of by name of everyone in the community that to the best of our knowledge is currently experiencing homelessness in Clackamas County. And having that list allows us to meet with all of our community providers who are doing outreach and providing safety off the streets and doing housing navigation. We come together every Thursday for 90 minutes and we work the list. We look at this by name list. We identify based on our community of providers, firsthand information and the information that's available to us from vulnerability assessments. Who are the most vulnerable today? Who is the most vulnerable in our community right now? And that household is prioritized for the next placement in an available program. And we do this every week. And the goal is to not so much quantify how many housing placements we are making. That's great. That's an important and significant measure of our progress. But we're also trying to get our overall number of people experiencing homelessness down. So that's what Built for Zero kind of alludes to, is getting to zero. it doesn't matter if you make 100 housing placements in a given month. If 200 households are becoming homeless in that month, your inflow to homelessness in that situation is greater than your outflow. So celebrating the 100 placements doesn't really indicate that you're getting, the overall number of people experiencing homelessness reduced. Built for Zero is a measure that allows us to track that and quantify that and be able to say, our housing placements are exceeding our entries into homelessness, people who are getting evicted or losing their housing. So the by name list, as I said, is that everyone in the community that we're aware of, we now have a by name list, a quality by name list that is, an updated real time, kind of best available point of information to help us understand who all is in the community experiencing homelessness. And I mentioned that weekly meeting where our providers come together for 90 minutes every Thursday. That's called case conferencing. So we hold this case conferencing meeting to as I said, really prioritize the most vulnerable and move them from unsheltered homelessness into housing as quickly as possible. And the goal is to get to functional zero. This is where at any given time, the ability of the county to move people out of homelessness exceeds the number of people moving into homelessness. And that's that inflow and outflow that I mentioned. That we are operating off of a full accounting of homelessness at all times. That means that our by name list is quality and it has enough inputs to really help us feel pretty confident that we have a full accounting, that we are working towards, equitable systems. So that's also about making sure that we're serving the most vulnerable first. And this is sustained over time, this ability to manage the outflow that is in excess of inflow month over month. As long as we're able to continue to do that, we will drive towards zero. We will drive towards a point where homelessness in Clackamas County is rare, brief, and not recurring. That's the goal towards which we're driving. Finally, I just want to, it's always important to remember that this work is affecting the lives of people in our community. And I've actually known David and Tony for many years, and this just so happens that my staff chose this one for the story to highlight for you all. But David and Tony's, they have been experiencing homelessness in Clackamas County for over a decade, living in a vehicle. I first met David and Tony in warming shelters in probably 2016, 2017, in that very difficult winter. And they would access services at the Clackamas Service Center frequently. So I'm just going to read this story about their housing success. So David and Tony were referred to us by a grassroots organization that provides services in Southeast Portland and North Clackamas called PDX Saints Love. And they were referred to a severe weather shelter, a warming shelter, last winter that was operated by the Father's Heart Street Ministry. Shortly after arriving, they were approved for a regional long-term rent assistance voucher. This is a new long-term rent assistance program funded by the Supportive Housing Services measure. They were approved to rent within 14 days and housed in just over 3 weeks, all after living outside for 11 years. David and Tony had a simple request when they moved in. They wanted firewood for their new fireplace. The Father's Heart prepared a welcome basket, which included all that they needed for that first fireplace moment, and much more to help them settle into their home. They're receiving supportive housing case management through the program's partnership with Greater New Hope Family Services. Greater New Hope is a brand new agency to Clackamas County. Before the Supportive Housing Services measure, they were not providing housing services in Clackamas County. They are now, and they're a culturally specific agency that serves Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So that's my update on our work to implement these various housing programs, and turn it to the council for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And let's see, we have Vahid Brown and Adam Brown. Is that right? Or am I mixing that up? Okay. Thank you so much for coming. And I see that Councilor Linville has a question. Let's start with Councilor Linville and go from there.
But great information. Thank you very much. So with your program where you recognize, or where you have kind of a counting of all of those homeless people, is it the entire all of Clackamas County? Or is it only people who are referred through some agency that you're able to kind of get a handle on who they are?
Thank you, Councilor Linville. Yes, it is the entire county, and it's meant to be everyone who is experiencing homelessness, not just those who are referred by an agency, although that's where we start. So our by name list starts from there. But with our street outreach programs, we're able to kind of ensure geographic coverage and distribution across the whole county, and through street outreach, identify everyone that we're aware of that's experiencing homelessness.
So you know who all of the people who are homeless in the city of Wilsonville. Is that correct then?
Yes, to the best of our knowledge, we are. Yes, that's right.
Great.
Thank you. Councillor Berry. The mute isn't going off. Let's go.
You're muted.
There you go. Nope, still not working. Beth, could you help Councillor Berry, and we'll go to Councillor Dunwell, please? You might have to click the audio again or something. Councillor,
Okay,
there you go. Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. I found that really interesting. I was curious on the numbers that you're using for counting people. Have you noticed, are a lot of the unhoused homeless people, were they born and raised in Clackamas County, or are they new to Clackamas County? Where are the numbers? Can you define the numbers a little bit more for us, please?
Sure. Yeah, that's be happy to, Councilor Berry. That is something that we do track annually. So that's a question that we ask folks during the point in time count in January every year, with respect to how long someone has been living in Clackamas County, who's experiencing homelessness. Were they from here? Did they move here? And since we've been conducting and asking that question and conducting pit counts, the overwhelming majority of people who are experiencing homelessness in Clackamas County are from Clackamas County. And the bulk of the remainder of folks are from the metro region. They're from the Portland metro region. Less than 10%, I think in some counts, it's something like 4 to 6% of people are not from the Portland metro area who are experiencing homelessness in the county. That's a consistent data point that is also tracked in Multnomah County and Washington County, as well as in other studies and point in time counts in other communities. It's something that we see pretty consistently, at least on the West Coast. The people in our community who are experiencing homelessness are from here, by and large.
Thank you.
It's so sad that people are experiencing this situation, but I think it also makes the taxpayers feel good that they're actually helping people within their own community, that it's not just people passing through. So I appreciate you sharing all this information with us and everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dunwell.
Great, thank you. I have several questions. The first question is, what percentage of those individuals that you're attempting to count or name are declining to be recognized or declining to be named?
So that's an interesting question. That has not come up in producing the point in time count. I'm sorry, in producing the by name list. People are not declining to be a part of our by name list. We are working on a policy where if someone declines to be included in the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, which is a data system that we are required to use by HUD and other funding sources, there have been a small number of people who do not want to be included in HMIS, and we still put them on the by name list and honor their request not to have their information in HMIS. And we're just developing now, a policy about how to connect those households to programs and services. But That isn't an issue that we're experiencing, where people are declining to be placed on the by name list.
What percentage of those, as you're doing that count, are declining additional services? Not everyone wants to be housed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a percentage for you, Councillor Dunwell, of people who are declining services. That isn't something that has been, so when we are doing the case conferencing process that I mentioned and prioritizing folks by vulnerability, it has not yet come up that when a household has been prioritized based on vulnerability and we reach out to them to match them with services that they have declined. We have not had that experience at this time. There was, a survey that I conducted several years ago of people experiencing homelessness on the Springwater Corridor Trail, and tried to get at that question, asking folks if they had, if they wanted to be connected with services, and if they had, a connection with a provider that could help them, resolve their homelessness. And at that time in that survey, and I can share that with the council, it was conducted on the Springwater Corridor Trail, as I said. The majority of people that I surveyed did not have a connection with a case manager. They did not know anyone that could help them resolve their homelessness. And a majority of people wanted to be connected to such services. So I think it's somewhat like Councillor Berry's question. I often hear what's referred to as the magnet myth, that people who are experiencing homelessness in a given community have come here from somewhere else. And there are a variety of reasons that are cited in that myth for why people come here. It's warm, there's great services, it's very generous, whatever. And it isn't borne out by the data. People are from here. And I've heard this question more frequently recently. What do you do when someone is declining? And that just isn't that is not what we're experiencing. We're not experiencing a lot of declines when we're trying to connect with folks to resolve their homelessness.
Well, okay, I do have a follow-up question to that, but before I go there, for those individuals who are receptive, you said you have a case manager that follows them through. A lot of these individuals either have mental health issues or addiction issues of some sort. What if they fail to follow, once they're housed, follow support that is being provided to them? Do you continue to let them live where they are, and or are there conditions for that sheltering?
Yes, there's conditions regardless. I mean, if someone is in a shelter, there are, rules of behavior that are, in a warming shelter or a severe weather shelter, they're clearly posted. If someone,
I guess I'm talking more about the actual once they're housed.
Once they're housed, yeah.
Yeah.
So with the regional long-term rent assistance voucher or other vouchers, this is a lease. So folks who are housed with our support sign a lease, and they are tenants in a landlord-tenant relationship, just like anyone else. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so if they violate their lease, then they are subject to the consequences of that, including eviction. We don't sort of excommunicate people from our programs or services if they are evicted. We continue to try to work with them and follow them through that process and try to walk alongside them if they did lose their housing, and continue to try to engage them in whatever way we can to prevent that from happening. But someone who is receiving our services is just like a tenant who doesn't have a voucher. They sign a lease and they're subject to the requirements of the lease agreement.
So it sounds like you've been doing this for a bit of time. What has the impact of Measure 110 had on your houseless and your homeless population within Clackamas County?
What impact has Measure 110 had on the houseless community in Clackamas County? So the most significant impact for me in the programs and services that we provide that I've seen is with respect to the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. This is a program I helped bring to the county in 2018, the Sheriff's Department and the DA. In that program's inception, the program referrals came through law enforcement referrals of individuals who were subject to arrest for possession of a controlled substance. And that diversion was an option that was provided to these individuals. You can go to jail, that's option A, or I can connect you with a case manager, and if you engage with them, that's option B, the arrest will go away. And that was how we would refer people into the LEAD program. Since Measure 110 passed, that arrest is no longer something that would happen. So those referrals are made sort of socially by the officers, that they might encounter someone experiencing homelessness in the community. In the past, they might have arrested them. Now they say, hey, there's a program that might help you. I'm going to make a referral, and this guy's going to come out and talk to you and see if you want to enroll in services. So that's where one of our programs is now changed. It's changed in how it's operating, that I have seen after 110.
So it sounds like it's tied more to hopefulness rather than consequences.
I think that's right.
Is that a fair way of saying it?
It's tied more to what rather than consequences?
Hopefulness that this is an individual who's ready rather than avoiding the consequences of an arrest.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that the expansion of our outreach programs, the key in street outreach is relationship development.
Yeah.
And staying with the relationship, showing up. Sometimes the first time you meet someone and talk to them when you're doing outreach, their sort of presentation is, I'm fine, I'm homeless because I want to be, I don't need anything, I don't really want anything from you.
Yep.
That's fine. I'm going to come back next week with a coffee and we'll just chat. You keep doing that week after week after week. After a number of times of that, someone might open up and they'll be like, okay, actually, I'm not fine. This is miserable. What have you got for me?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. I appreciate, I'm sorry, I had a lot of questions. I really appreciate all of your responses, and I'm so pleased that you have significantly more funding to help you move forward with this.
Thank you. Council President Aukervall.
Thank you. This is really great information for us to hear. And I have a few questions about the Built for Zero, and then also a little more curious about the rapid rehousing too. And really, we'll have a data question about the Built for Zero, but then also curious about the connection, or those how does somebody, end up on the list, or how does somebody get assistance for rapid rehousing, or how does that initial connection point happen, I guess. But for the Built for Zero, am I correct then in understanding that there's more people that are finding resolution and services and being housed than are being added to the list currently? Is that our current situation?
That is our current situation.
Okay, and then yeah, exactly. That's good. That's the intention of the program, and that's good. So what is that margin like, and is it steady over time?
These are great questions. The margin right now is pretty close. So in January 2023, outflow exceeded inflow by like 100 out of 1,500, let's say. So if 1,400 folks were identified as coming into our coordinated entry system, 1,500 were going out. So we're exceeding inflow, but not by a huge margin. Mm-hmm. And that is new. I mean, that's really since 2020. Prior to 2020, outflow never exceeded inflow, right? There were always more people showing up on the list than people exiting the list. And so before the supportive housing services measure, we had a situation where wait lists would just get longer and longer and longer. That is not the case anymore. We're not even maintaining wait lists anymore. We don't do wait lists. We connect people, we match people week after week directly to programs. So what we're hoping, and I have full confidence because of these resources and these new programs, that margin will grow, and that's how we get to zero, right? So the greater the margin, the greater the progress. It's
either time or increasing the margin, right? But
and can I add one more piece to that? And that's like preventing entries into homelessness, right? So to the extent that our coordinated housing access list used to kind of just accumulate a queue of folks who needed access to services. Some of them, they were on the brink of eviction. They needed short-term rent assistance to stabilize, or it could have been someone who's chronically homeless. And until we got to that person on the list, we didn't know which it was. but we're trying to be a more responsive system, and instead at that entry point saying, what is the intervention that you need? Have you been homeless for 10 years, or are you a mother with young kids who had a medical bill? Now you can't sustain your housing and you're at the risk of entering into homelessness. Well, the best thing we can do as a system, not just the right moral thing to do, but also the most cost-effective thing for that mother and that small family, is to stabilize them in the housing that they already have. So I think that pipeline into homelessness, or to your point about the inflow versus outflow, one key component is that prevention piece.
And that's great. That kind of brings me to the rapid rehousing question too, right? So how are people identified as needing that assistance? It seems like the quicker that the assistance can get put into place, the better for that, the outcome, and getting our list down to zero. So how are people connected with initially when they're in that situation?
Yeah, so the current state is that folks are connected to rapid rehousing through what's called an off-ramp of our coordinated housing access system. And that's exactly what Adam was talking about. So right now we had a backlog during COVID when a lot of folks called the coordinated housing access system to get rent assistance. That was our point of entry for that. And that was a huge need. We've now cleared that backlog, and so we're no longer weeks behind in terms of taking calls. Now we're taking live calls again. So when someone calls and is in a situation where rapid rehousing is the appropriate intervention for them, and I should say that the purpose of coordinated entry is to determine the appropriate type, level, and duration of housing intervention for any household, depending on how long they've been homeless, what kind of circumstances there are. And so our assessors at Coordinated Housing Access are experts at sort of making that call, saying, oh, yes, the situation that Adam talked about, that's a rapid rehousing or a prevention situation. And so those could go through an off-ramp directly into that program. That's how rapid rehousing functions today. We do plan to create a case conferencing process as well for rapid rehousing. Right now, our case conferencing process is focused on permanent supportive housing and immediate shelter, safety off the streets. Someone is really vulnerable, really sick. They need to get off of the streets now. That's what that process is focused on. But we will be launching the case conferencing process for rapid rehousing as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I really appreciate all these excellent questions. So circling back maybe to the beginning of our questions, and thinking of the map you showed us with the housing units, and that some are still being finished and completed, and our businesses and our successful larger businesses and high income earners are contributing to an additional 40 million coming into Clackamas County, which is where Wilsonville is located. I know that's an obvious fact, but I just want to say that. And there's going to be more every year. And so as a mayor, and I'm fully confident all the other counselors share this feeling, I am very committed to being part of getting our homelessness program in population in, or people experiencing homelessness in Clackamas County to zero. And that I go to all these meetings with the different cities in Clackamas County. Also went to one today with mayors from a number of cities in the metropolitan area, including the mayor of Portland. And so I think it helps to, everything that we do here, and we heard this from other mayors, to be successful is helping other people across the region. So I appreciate that we can focus on Clackamas County as we are. And I want to know, so I'm very much behind what you're doing here. I've been following it for a long time and sharing this information with other people. And so on these Thursday calls, who is calling in from Wilsonville and reporting on the people here? How does that work?
That's a great question, Mayor Fitzgerald. So right now we don't have a representative from Wilsonville. I mean, as I mentioned, all of our street outreach providers are on that call, on that case conferencing meeting, as well as all of our shelter providers. So in our street outreach programs, are working in Wilsonville. So LEAD and others do work in Wilsonville.
Okay.
But we don't have like an anchor agency in Wilsonville that's participating in that.
Okay. And in other cities, do you have anchor agencies? I know, as we heard on the call several times this morning, I mean, and we have different sized cities in Clackamas County, but we've got Oregon City, they probably have an anchor agency. What about the cities about the size of Wilsonville? Do they have anchor agencies? Maybe
Yeah,
so?
Yeah, so the our shelter providers are in Milwaukee, Oregon City, and our severe weather centers participate in this as well, especially during the winter, and those are in Canby in addition, and Molalla. So those agencies are all, and those cities are all represented, but by virtue of the fact that those programs are located in their communities. So it's not like, it's not municipal staff.
Okay, and then we have a wonderful police force that have for many years, I think, had a very compassionate way of talking to people experiencing homelessness, finding out what their situation is. We've just hired a behavioral health specialist who has a certain role. It's not targeted at this, I realize. But how can we get to the comfort of knowing that everybody that we see in Wilsonville who is experiencing homelessness, their name is on a list and somebody comes to look for them? Because as mayor, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I would welcome, the partnerships that would allow for that and increase our ability to, with assurance say we're getting everyone in Wilsonville who's experiencing homelessness on this list. Whether that's if you have an officer that's dedicated to be kind of a homeless liaison officer. We do have a homeless liaison officer from Oregon City that participates occasionally in our case conferencing, as well as one in Milwaukee. That's a potential route. Also, I think you have some community-based organizations, some small ones in Wilsonville. What is it, the Heart of the City, and
Yes.
And another one, I can't remember the name of it. That I would love to build some relationship there and invite them into the room.
Well, thank you.
Mayor, I'll just add that in my interviews with the service providers, I am sharing the contact information for Clackamas County with them, because they are kind of the frontline people who do know the community members really well. So that information is being shared as well to grow that network.
Good. And then I know we have other items on our agenda, but I consider this to be the number one interest. So I'd like to ask a couple more questions. And so we talked about prevention a lot, and our champion analyst, Council President Ackerball, who is a great analyst, really pointed out that we need to have the numbers of people coming into homelessness managed. And, if they're on the brink of going into homelessness, can we get them to rapid rehousing so that math really works? And one thing about Wilsonville that that helps us all is that for decades previously, we have had counselors and leadership who have seen to it that we have some subsidized housing. We have a number of subsidized apartment buildings, and our current council just voted to continue working on this transit-oriented development that will be in Wilsonville. So I like the idea of, giving us all hope that we're moving in the right direction. And so people who hit these patches of terrible bad luck and a convergence, a lot of bad things that happen, and they suddenly don't have a place to live anymore. I'm glad to know that we can look at the rapid rehousing and that we can start knowing their names and can, finding ways for them to not go into homelessness. And then the last question I just wanted to make is, at that moment where somebody is, maybe they were living with their aunt, last place they could live, then the aunt got evicted and there's nowhere to go. I've toured 4 homeless I guess villages you called them, including the Veterans Village. And I would only know how these things work if I had year-long history in the field. So I just have a tiny bit of information. But can you talk about the difference of the hope of that person, that hypothetical, maybe it's a family that I just described, getting into permanent housing based on three different scenarios. One, their housing ended and they moved into a tent. Two, their housing ended and they got into rapid rehousing somehow. We helped them. Maybe three, they didn't get to a tent, but they were in a staffed, managed village of some kind with all of those services. So could you just, is there a brief way to describe the potential for those three scenarios in exiting and this way of living and getting into a productive, more healthy life?
Yes, Mayor Fitzgerald, I can try to take a stab at that. So if someone is living in a tent in the community, they're unsheltered, then they're furthest from permanent housing from the other two scenarios you presented. And so what we need to do is find them with street outreach or a community partner that maybe it's the library, maybe it's a day center or a church that's offering a free meal that says, there's this coordinated housing access phone number, let's call that. So we need to connect with them if they're living in a tent. So that's going to take street outreach or the availability of the information about our system throughout the community. This helps, right? Talking to you all and sharing the information about our programs to cities is a part of that. And then once we're connected with someone, that's the time lag is have we found them? Are we connected? Once we're connected, they're on our list and they're on that part of that conversation every Thursday. And if they're experiencing unsheltered homelessness, they're in a tent, then they're vulnerable. So that's we're going to prioritize them. If they have a disabling condition, if they've been living in the tent for a long time, then they go to the top of the list, right? And so the likelihood of them moving from that top of the list into housing is very high because they're going to be matched with a housing navigator today. Like that will be the outcome of that case conferencing meeting, is that the most vulnerable folks on that list are moved to matching, as we say. So it's a matter of having adequate street outreach, adequate awareness throughout the community, and adequate housing navigation investments. And that's all of the things that we're working on. The other two are kind of well taken care of. If someone is connected with a rapid rehousing program, then they have a case manager who's working with them right now, finding an apartment, and can fund the move-in costs and up to 2 years of rent. So that's a pretty good resolution. And because they're in our system, if the 2 years of rent is insufficient, if there's a disabling condition or some reason they're not able to return to the workforce and pay their rent independently, then we have options to kind of move them on to more lengthy subsidy as needed. And then someone who's in a village, again, there's dedicated housing navigation resources in the Veterans Village and in all of our transitional housing programs. None of those are dead ends. So no one goes to the Veterans Village or into motel-based transitional housing and gets left there. As soon as someone is moving into the Veterans Village or into one of the motel rooms in our transitional housing program, immediately they're working in relationship with staff on site to identify what their barriers are, remove those barriers, and attempt to move them into permanent housing as soon as possible. And again, the goal in all of our system there is to move folks into permanent housing within 45 days on average.
Thank you very much. And I know we've gone over, this has been a very valuable conversation. We have time for one very quick question from Councillor Berry, and then we'll go on to our report from our city attorney, and then two other items to finish before 7 p.m.
So can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
The quick question that I have is, when we learn of somebody that needs your assistance, what's the best way to connect them with your program?
I mean, the best way to connect folks is to connect them with coordinated housing access. I can send staff that we've been in communication with that information. It's a phone number. It's also a link online that someone can fill out the assessment themselves. Anytime you have questions or you're concerned, I don't know what the coordinated housing access is, or let me just put this out there. housingservices@clackamas.us is an email address that all of my team can see. So if the city staff or city councilors aren't sure, please ask. Just reach out to housingservices@clackamas.us.
And
Majid and
Council-
Adam, thank you very much. And
Thank you both for coming.
yes, really appreciate it. You're doing great work. And we will now move to our city attorney for her report.
Thank you. And Councilor Berry, I just want to follow up that in the memo that's attached to my staff report, the contact information, both the phone number and the email address for the online form are contained in that memo. So you all have that information as well.
Thank you.
That's good.
Okay. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen now. Okay. So thank you, Mayor and councilors. Again, Amanda Guile-Hinman, City Attorney. And today we're going to be talking about Prohibited Camping Code Update, the Prohibited Camping Code Update Project, and the policy considerations that are going to underpin what the code that we're going to develop. Given the time frame and that I wrote a pretty robust staff report, I'm going to kind of skim over some of these initial slides to really get to the policy questions. So let me see if I can advance my screen here. So we're going to do some background, just quick background information, do a quick overview of the city project, the community outreach to date, and then get to the policy questions and next steps. So again, as background, I've done a pretty detailed discussion of the case law and the two House bills that are really driving this project. So I would suggest that to any community member who's watching, who's interested in that background information, it is contained in my staff report that is part of the council packet. But the gist of all of these, both the case law and the state statutes, the gist is really that what they say is if a jurisdiction does not have enough shelter beds for its unhoused population, that it cannot ban camping on public property outright. What they do allow is for reasonable time, place, and manner regulations, which are going to be the policy questions that we're going to get into tonight. So the overview of this city project is to address the city code with regard to prohibited camping. The goals for this is to be compliant with the state law and the state laws and the federal case laws, to make sure that we're continuing to reflect our city values, and that we're doing robust education and outreach to community members about what this project is and what kind of resources are out there, like having Clackamas County come and present on the great work that it's doing. We have an interdepartmental team that's working behind the scenes on this project, doing code review and helping coordinate the outreach. That's with Public Works, Parks and Recreation, the library, our police department, code enforcement, and our communications person, Bill Evans. And then finally, I just want to touch on, and I've kind of already said this, about what we can and what we can't do. Wilsonville does not currently have enough shelter beds in its city limits. And so we cannot ban camping outright at this point in time. What we can do is look at some reasonable time, place, and manner regulations for camping. So the community outreach that we've done to date, we've done a Let's Talk Wilsonville questionnaire. We had 437 responses, which is by far the largest response we've ever had to a Let's Talk Wilsonville survey. So it shows that people are really engaged in this discussion topic. We've also put out a questionnaire for persons with lived experience, and I just got the results today, so I wasn't able to incorporate them into this presentation, but as they come up, I will try to highlight some points that came out of that questionnaire. That was run through Wilsonville Community Sharing, facilitated that for us as part of their food pantry that they do every Tuesday. We've done stakeholder interviews, both with service providers and community-based organizations, as well as government entities like Clackamas County. I've also been making the rounds at our different advisory boards, going to their meetings and talking about this project and getting some feedback from them. And then we've also had information in both our Boones Ferry Messenger and in with the Wilsonville spokesman in an interview that I did with our Wilsonville spokesman reporter. So I'm going to quickly breeze through some of the Let's Talk Wilsonville responses to conserve time. I will note that all of the data regarding the responses is in the council packet as an attachment to my staff report. So again, we got 437 responses. Overwhelmingly, people are concerned about camping on public property, both in the Portland metro area and in Wilsonville. The most important factors that people wanted us to consider, number one was sanitary conditions. Public safety was number two, and then 3 and 4 were proximity to schools and proximity to residential areas. When we required people to force rank areas where to allow overnight camping, they identified that the most suitable areas were on city property, particularly like in our parking lots and potentially vacant city lots. The least suitable were in our parks and on our trails and near schools and residential areas. The most important thing, again, we did another forced ranking on considerations for developing new policies. The two most important things that stood out were duration of stay and hours that we would allow camping. With regard to a private camping program, this is not something that Wilsonville currently does, but many jurisdictions do have, not required under state law, but we wanted to throw it out there to sort of test the waters of the interests of the community. And it was really mixed. There may be some opportunity for us to do some additional surveying on this, given that we got pretty mixed reviews from community members about their appetite for a private camping program. Some highlights from the stakeholder interviews that we've done to date is that for Wilsonville specifically, that most of our unhoused residents are living in vehicles rather than living in tents or sleeping just outdoors. That the rest areas south of the river is commonly used overnight for people who are sleeping in their vehicles. There was a real focus on sanitation, and that pairs with the responses that we got from the Let's Talk Wilsonville questionnaire as well, that sanitation is a big concern. There was general support of closing or limiting our parks for camping. Right now, we do close our parks every night. So keeping that consistent was, there was general support for that. And then, as I noted, the attachment A to my staff report is a summary of my stakeholder interviews. And I've also outlined any resources or programs from those interviews that the service providers gave me information about. They're contained in there as well. Oh, and I will note that I forgot to mention, one of the stakeholder interviews I did as well was with the school district. If I didn't mention that, we did do an interview with them as well. So let's jump into the policy questions. These policy questions are really informed by the community outreach that we've done so far, and also looking at a comparison to other cities. So the attachment B to my staff report is a comparison chart with other cities. And I will note, it might seem a little odd that the cities we're comparing to are Bend and Medford and a couple coastal cities. Those are the cities to date who have updated their codes. So we're not looking at cities who haven't updated their codes because their codes are not, probably most likely not compliant with state law at this point. So not really relevant. I will say that this is a constant topic of communication for city attorneys because most city attorneys are leading these efforts. So to the extent that other communities are working through this process in the metro area, we are having those conversations right now. They just aren't, either they're not as far along as we are, or they haven't, well, they're in the process and they're just not as far, or they haven't even started the process yet, which given the July deadline is an interesting fact. Okay, so let's get into policy question 1, and this is whether to limit hours for camping. So again, as I noted in the Let's Talk Wilsonville survey, respondents were concerned about the duration allowed for camping and the time allowed. Generally, what I have seen is that cities do one of two things. They either do a 24-hour period or they do a block of time, usually overnight. Now, the 24-hour period is a little bit harder to enforce because it really will start from when somebody, an official sees the camping going on, and then you would count 24 hours from that point, versus like an 8 p.m. to an 8 a.m. But it does allow more flexibility. One of the things that came out of a lot of the interviews that I did is that a lot of unhoused individuals do have jobs. And so if they are working at night and need to sleep during the day, we could be missing out by not providing some opportunity for them to sleep and without violating our code. So there is a little bit less flexibility, obviously, with doing a straight time duration, but like an 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. But it is easier to enforce and kind of know what the regulations are. There was one other point I was going to make about this. Oh, this was also something, and we'll get into this. This is a later policy discussion about whether or not to maybe have some more permissive regulations for people who are camping in their vehicles versus people who are camping in tents or camping outdoors. This could be, if there's interest in doing that, this could be one of those areas where you would see a distinction. So with that, I'm going to pause and write down any feedback that you have on this policy question.
I have a question. Are we going to pause after, how many policy questions do we have?
There's 9.
Okay, so, given that it is now,
do you want me to run through all of them and then?
I don't think that's possible to do that. I'm
Okay.
sorry, Amanda. I see a quick question from Katie or Councilor Dunwell.
Just a very quick question, Amanda. You're saying that they have the 24 hours, but isn't it also in the case, in addition to that, there's an additional 72-hour notification period before they're cleared, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So when you clean up if there's going to be a cleanup of a campsite, you have to provide a 72-hour notice before that can happen. Correct.
Okay,
You would cite and notice, basically, is what you would do. So Mayor, do you want me to just continue to pause and just as we have time go through these, or would you like me to run through the other questions?
I'd like you to run through all of it if you can, and then we're going to have to come back at our next meeting and follow up, or we can have people email questions.
Sure.
Hey,
Sure.
Mayor,
Yes.
just since we have such a light, regular agenda, might I make a recommendation that we just hold this over and put it under city attorney's business? We can pick this up. She can go through these and ask questions after each policy question. If we pause right now, we could definitely get through Mark, and I think Martin as well. I'm not sure if it's going to take 25 minutes.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. So let's do that, because our staff then could go home. And Amanda, you are stuck with us anyway. So thank you very
I'm
much
stuck
for
with you
that.
all anyway. I was going to say, I was a debater in college. I can talk real fast, but I think it's better if we let everyone else go.
Okay, then we can ask our questions. Thank you.
So that would make Mark next.
Good evening, Mayor Fitzgerald, members of the City Council, Mark Otned, Public Government Affairs Director here to talk about the new Explore Wilsonville visual identity. This is a process that began several months ago. It included a survey of the City Council members, the Tourism Promotion Committee, and members of staff to what is Wilsonville? What is it that Wilsonville, what are the characteristics of the community that we feel and that we would like to promote to visitors? We had an old logo, and the Tourism Promotion Committee thought it was time for a logo or identity refresh. So I'm going to share a screen now and present what we've come up with, and we hope you like it. This is the original, what we call the old Explore Wilsonville logo graphic. It was made by a former contractor when we were at the time promoting what we called pocket trips. Subsequently, we've gone away from that terminology, and the logo itself, if you got rid of the pocket trip component, it was not much to it. So the Tourism Promotion Committee unanimously has selected our new revised Explore Wilsonville logo graphic here. You'll notice that it incorporates a component of the city's logo in terms of the flower in the Wilsonville. The colors green were specifically chosen because they represent attributes of Wilsonville that we and visitors both feel when they visit here. There's a nice script explore with a all capital Wilsonville, so you have a contrast in fonts, and this works really good at various sizes. And here we kind of can see a bit of both our logos side by side. And the Tourism Promotion Committee hopes that you also will appreciate and like the new Explore Wilsonville logo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Opnad. I think that is action oriented. I love the kind of call to action of that script typeface. Does anyone have any comments? Okay, thank you for the excellent work.
Thank you.
Lack of questions doesn't mean we're not very impressed. Oh,
very good.
We got one. We got one from Councillor Dunwell.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking too much tonight. Actually, I think it's a beautiful, as a person who's led many graphic designers in my career, I think it's beautiful. I do have one question that I would like you to take back to the group, is that I'm not seeing a continuation of the colors. So it feels a bit disconnected from the other, the city's logo. Can you have a conversation with them about it? Or you may know why.
That was on purpose.
Yeah, that was intentional.
Yeah.
Okay.
The identity of the destination marketing organization or tourism promotion program is different than that of the city. So we wanted an echo of the city, but we did not want to replicate. And we did look at that as an option, but this was by far preferred by the Tourism Promotion Committee.
You needed a bit of a, not necessarily an arm's length, but maybe a little bit of a length between the two.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So now we'll go on to Mr. Montalvo with our update on the architectural assessment of the Kiva building.
I guess I would ask Martin if he can get through his in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Montalvo.
Martin's fine, ma'am.
Well,
so Martin, Public Works Operations Manager. I'm going to share screen here with everyone. A brief PowerPoint. So just a little background. This is the Kiva building here on the left-hand side. It's part of what we call the Art Tech campus. The building on the right is the Art Tech building. The Kiva is the building we're speaking about this evening. It's constructed in 1979. City purchased it in 2007 and then leased the property to the Westland Wilsonville School District. In 2021, the school district vacated and we resumed full maintenance of the facility. Shortly after we occupied it, we started noticing some issues in the ceiling and some issues on the walls. The walls were separating, the ceiling was cracking. We started seeing some other issues on the floor, structural components. So we went up into the attic and started to take a look. So for the counselors who've been here a while, you've seen these images before. These are the structural trusses that basically hold the roof. And these gang nails inside of the trusses have completely failed. The truss supports, the vertical members have pulled away from the gang nails. 2/3 of the trusses have failed, and the building is currently red tagged by our building official, which means it cannot be occupied for any use. Last summer, we put out a, this is just some images of some of the damage inside and the current bracing that we have inside to support the building from structurally collapsing. Last summer, we put out a bid to try and get the repairs done. We had no bidders. We talked to a few of the contractors that we've done work with before and asked, why didn't you put in? And then the big thing was too many unknowns. So this last fall, we put out a package with Sarah Architecture, who's one of our on-call architect firms, and they did the remodel for City Hall. So you've seen some of their work before. Asked them to take a look at it and do a full evaluation and say, well, what really needs to happen to address some of these unknowns? And what they wanted to do was figure out, how do you replace the roof, replace the trusses, and then what are the ancillary impacts of that? And that includes removing 2/3 of all the trusses, replacing the complete roof, replacing the ceiling and the lighting, because you've got to take the ceiling down and the lighting to fix the roof. You're going to have to remove the HVAC, the fire protection, and the AV systems that are currently there in order to replace the roof, and then put them back in. Refinishing all the damaged walls and floors, making any code compliant improvements for accessibility and access. So this was another big unknown for us, and Sarah helped us figure out like there are going to have to be some significant changes to get current with accessibility requirements. What we didn't have them do is include any programmatic improvements. So we had them do a cost analysis for what do we need to do to get it open? No improvements. Kitchen stays the way it is. Anything that had to be replaced gets a new coat of paint, but the rest of the building stays as it is. There's also no furnishings or other interior improvements. So we looked at it in terms of 4 options. The first one was option 1, which is getting you to full use, but only doing the bare bones. So the first thing they identified is you're going to have to install an internal elevator. It's a 2-story building with no second story, first story ADA access. You have to renovate first and second floor restrooms for ADA accessibility. You have to do parking area improvements, improving internal staircase, new ADA compliant emergency exits. All of those exits currently don't comply. And the estimated cost for that was $3.4 million. This was a team that put this together with Sarah Architecture, our structural engineer, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, a structural engineer, and then also an estimator. So this is a fairly good number. I feel very confident with it. Option 2 was minimal full use with an exterior elevator. So rather than sacrifice space in the Kiva building, give that elevator out to the exterior walkway. Both buildings could possibly share it. Very similar improvements required outside of the elevator being outside. That package was $3.6 million. Option 3 is minimum use and limited staff basement. So if you don't allow the public to utilize the lower level for any reason, then you don't have the requirement to install an elevator. It would basically relegate the lower basement level to storage and some staff occupancy, but nothing more. And by staff occupancy, it's get what you need and get out. Renovating the first floor restrooms, improving internal staircase, new ADA compliant emergency exit, and then new floor usage for just staff access. That's $2.5 million. And then the final option was, what would it take to demo the Kiva building? Selectively preserving portions of the foundation to maintain the land bridge that currently provides the ADA access for the Art Tech building, the adjacent Art Tech building. And that cost is $620,000. So then the last question that we asked the team is, in today's market, what is a comparable 8,000 square foot new building cost? And under the current market conditions, for similarly sized 8,000 square foot buildings, fully compliant with all ADA and other accessibility issues, and could be designed for your programmatic needs, you're looking at $3.9 million. That's hard cost construction. You need an additional $30,000 to cover, or 30% to cover design permits, for a total project budget of approximately $5 million. Concurrently, we've got 2 competing projects that we're going on. There's the police station renovation. It's also in that same city block complex. And then the Art Tech programming analysis, which was, I'm going to take a look at the adjacent Art Tech building and figuring out what you could do with that. So staff's recommendation is to proceed with the demolition option and then leverage these 2 existing projects and look at the entire community service block as a holistic project to address the needs of the police department, our parks department, and then minimize the liability for the organization from that failing building. That is my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have this evening.
Thank you, Martin. And we're not making a recommendation tonight.
No, we're not asking for anything other than if you have any major questions, if you want this brought back for more discussion, happy to do that. The big thing is we just want to get this to you because we have the information. Any follow-on discussions about demolition or retrofitting would require budgeting, and you would have to make a decision then. So it's just really just getting this in front of you for the first time.
And before we go to the questions, I just want to say, I would also ask people, as you think about this, we've all had the staff report, we can read it. Also, send further questions in writing that we can answer later if we don't get to them. So I'll start with Councilor Linville.
Thank you. To my knowledge, we have not identified a specific needed use for that space at the current time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In other words, we don't have specific programming for that building that is a demonstrated need right now.
That's correct.
Okay.
Councilperson Ackerval.
Thank you. I guess I'm curious. Was it just last year? Time is weird. But when we talked about this earlier and with looking at the trusses and the different options, the cost estimates at that time that were put in front of council were very different than what it looks like we're seeing now, including demolishing the building was a different cost estimate. So I'm wondering why we're seeing such a big change, because potentially it's a very large change. I think it was like under 300,000.
So I think there's maybe multiple things going on there. Some of it was if we didn't know what we didn't know was the primary thing. We had to bring in some experts to look at it. But I think some of it was we were talking about budgeting to get I think it was Wilsonville community sharing in some things that we had to do. So there was a bunch of different numbers that we brought to council that we put into the budget, and then we added some money for supplemental budget.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't have perfect information, which is why we went out and put out a bid or brought in an architect and brought in some estimators to make sure that we were looking at this holistically. And Martin can add to that if he wants.
So
yeah, the 300,000 basically accounted for replacing the roof and repairing the trusses, nothing else. So there was all of those unknowns that scared all of the contractors.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, there's a lot of things here you're not looking at. And that's why we had to bring in the experts and say, oh, here are literally 10 things that are going to be affected by peeling off this roof and fixing these trusses. Because once you hit a threshold, monetary threshold, you kick in building code improvements that you have to comply with. And replacing that roof would kick in numerous building code requirements that we hadn't envisioned.
Okay.
I believe, I'm sure you can send the whole council these documents, but if I remember correctly, we did have a staff report earlier a few months ago that talked about how what you just described, Martin, on how the bidding, we didn't get enough bidding or solid bids because the contractors said they need more information.
Yeah.
And so if you could, I think it would be really useful if you could just resend those packets and we could read it with this one, and because we have 2 new counselors, so they can look at those.
Yeah, I'll be happy to send over the previous information. We received no bids from the.
No bids. Okay, so nobody wanted to do it. So, well, thank you very much. And remind us now, Mr. Cosgrove, what is the next step for the council on this?
Well, I think for us to move forward, because we're going to have to budget for demolition. If you have further questions, or if you're thinking that you don't want to move in that direction, we would need some direction on what it is you want us to bring back in terms of information. Because our recommendation is let's budget, let's bring back a contract to city council to demo that building.
I'm going to say, having read the prior material and also I just went on a tour with somebody from the Home Builders Association who was talking about renovating older buildings, and they've tried various things. What I've heard today, I believe the most prudent move is to budget to demolish the building as described. I see nodding.
I agree, Mayor.
That sounds
That was my thought before Mr. Montalvo even showed the options. So
I think we will use the public's money much more responsibly and effectively if we scrap this building and do the entire, look at the entire thing and plan cohesively.
And I would just offer up to anybody on council that's maybe having questions or wants more information. We do have 2 new members of council. So some of this is a continuity thing. But we're happy to meet individually with you. If you need more information, or if you want to look at some of the old stuff we've done, we can provide that to you electronically. Whatever you need, let us know.
Because we're not deciding today. This is just a direction. So I would.
No, we are deciding on direction to move forward to come back with demo. So
I mean, we're not voting.
no, we're not voting on anything, but it is
Okay.
direction.
So thank you for, I would request that you send those materials to all of us as a comprehensive review, please.
Okay.
I will touch you tomorrow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. That concludes our work session, and we're a little bit behind schedule. Let's reconvene for the regular meeting at 7:15.
And Mayor Fitzgerald, can I ask that everyone make sure and mute their audio and cameras, as we are still streaming live during that break?
Okay, thank you. So
Yep.
we'll mute on cameras and audio right now. I call to order a meeting of the Wilsonville City Council Thursday, February 23rd at 7:17 p.m. Will the city recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Barry, Present.
Councillor Linville,
here,
Council President Ockervall,
Here.
Councillor Dunwell,
Here.
Mayor Fitzgerald.
Here. Will the city manager please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Whoops, is he there?
I am.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
to the flag
To the flag
of the United States
of
of
the United
America
States of America,
and to the
to
republic
the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands,
one nation,
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with
and justice
liberty
for all.
and justice for all.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the following order of agenda as amended with the minutes excluded?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion to approve the agenda as amended with the minutes held out has been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to mayor's business. And since our last meeting on February 6th, I have some meetings I want to share with you. And I know during your councilor comments, you will all share some of the meetings you've gone to representing our city around the region. This last week, the city community development department did great work in preparing to host about 100 regional business executives and government officials for a Greater Portland, Inc. best practices tour of our area cities. And Greater Portland, Inc. is an economic development organization in the area. And I want to thank Councillor Linville for being our representative to that group this year. And their acronym is GPI. So GPI had basically I think it was 2.5 or 3 days of meetings. They were in Hillsborough. Wilsonville hosted them for lunch. This group of 100, they went to Vancouver, Gresham, and Portland. By the way, the mayor of Vancouver is very active in this group. So the purpose of this multi-day event was to garner some key takeaways for what constitutes best practices for economic development and high wage growth. our staff, Chris Namsu, head of community development for Wilsonville for many years, and Matt Lorenzen, economic development manager, presented some excellent comprehensive presentations about the history of our industrial development and what has really made Wilsonville great with our $1.5 billion payroll, and that is with a B. That includes all of the people working in Wilsonville. I look forward to the council seeing their presentations at a later date. And I was also on a panel during their visit to Wilsonville with the mayor of Tualatin and the council president for Sherwood. We also had a business leader from Twist Bioscience and also from DW Fritz answering questions posed to us by WEA, which is another economic development group, kind of a business association in the Western Economic Association. Is that right? West Side Economic Association. So it was really a great event, and they returned from that. They closed out, they arrived by bus and they left on West, the commuter train to Beaverton. So we were really proud, and they seemed to have a great visit. I've also been working closely in the last 2 weeks with offices of Representative Courtney Neron and Senator Aaron Woods and our staff to coordinate city testimony on a number of bills in the state legislature. And I have our legislative agenda here, which has really been being put to good use. Thank our staff for all the work. This last week, I testified in writing and in person before the Joint Transportation Committee supporting House Bill 2662, along with Dwight Brashear, our Smart Transit Director, who also testified in support. And just to recap, this House Bill 2662 would fund an ODOT study of extending the Portland metro area west commuter train from Wilsonville to Salem, with stops in Donald, Woodburn, and Kaiser. And this bill is strongly supported by 7 cities, including Wilsonville. The cities of Aurora, Donald, Hubbard, Kaiser, and Salem are all strongly enthusiastic about extending this rail, and also received support from Salem Mass Transit District Chariots and Yamhill County Transit. So really, what some of the strong points that were brought up by our Wilsonville testimony, and also by some of the other persons testifying in support, were how this commuter train could relieve congestion on I-5. It could keep our freight transit moving. And as you know, the traffic congestion continues, we think that extending this commuter rail will be a great, you know, we need to study it. We want to find out through this study, is it feasible? What are the benefits it can bring? And what are the best ways to do this? And we would have that done by, I believe, the end of 2024 and reported back to the legislature. So we saw some really good discussion about that. I also arranged and submitted testimony aligning with our legislative agenda, including support of expansion of high-speed broadband communications in Oregon by leveraging federal funds. And the city, we also provided testimony. The city provided testimony regarding a housing production bill that you may have been reading about that is presented by the governor. And this is really challenging all cities to greatly increase their housing production. We're really ready to go with housing production with Frog Pond East and South, so that's good to know. Some of the other things that maybe are presented in that bill, we don't have a lot of control over, such as interest rates and how fast people are ready to build and buy homes. But I appreciate the idea of increasing our housing on all fronts, because it's part of reducing entry into homelessness and also reducing housing prices. There are 2 more points regarding the legislature. They're very busy down there, but we submitted testimony supporting the legislature's reauthorizing and funding of the Regional Significant Industrial Sites Program. This is also discussed in our council's legislative agenda. And this is where the state would help local governments fund industrial infrastructure that leads to the creation of more high-wage jobs, which in turn will produce more income tax that funds important programs and state government programs. So we supported that because in order to put in the sewer, sidewalks, and water and all of the power needed to attract excellent high-wage industrial jobs, cities are going to need some help from the state. Provided testimony regarding the legislature's search for appropriate sites for semiconductor and computer chip manufacturing. That's been very big in the news. We recommended that North Wilsonville sites in the metro urban growth boundary were appropriate for industrial development and advocated that prime farmlands south of Wilsonville in the French Prairie Rural Reserve were inappropriate to consider for industrial development, and really highlighted the bank of available land in the urban growth boundary today that really are ripe for development of industrial lands. They already have a lot of infrastructure ready for them. And if we were going to decide to build a giant installation south of the river, the amount of funding required from the public to bring services out to that kind of development would be extremely expensive. So that is all that I have for mayor's business. And that brings us to communications. Do we have anyone ready to present? I don't think we do. So that now we're going on to citizen input and community announcements. I will ask the city attorney if we have anyone on Zoom or the phone wanting to present.
I have no idea. I don't know if Beth knows.
I'm waiting for people to raise their hand. So yes, Mayor, we have Sean Leahy that would like to speak, and then Stephen Benson would be next. So Sean.
Okay, before we go ahead, I do need to read this section, please. Citizen input and community announcements is an opportunity for visitors to address the city council on items not on the agenda. It is also the time to address items that are on the agenda but are not scheduled for a public hearing. Staff and the city council will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizen input before tonight's meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes and use the Zoom raised hand feature or press *9 on your phone to let the city council know you'd like to speak. And I understand we have 2 speakers, and we can start with Mr. Leahy.
Correct.
Yes.
Go
Great.
ahead.
Thank you. Okay, great. For the record, my name is Sean Leahy. My address is as it is written on my submitted speaker card. I last provided citizen input during the February 6th City Council meeting. At that time, I brought to the council's attention an offensive street name that had been approved in the new Frog Pond Ridge development, Southwest Columbine Avenue. I'm confident that the majority of us would agree that the term Columbine is far more commonly associated with the horrific school shooting than it is with the flower that the street was tastelessly named for. There have been 24 mass shootings in this country since that February 6th council meeting. Renaming this street is a public service. During my last comments, I informed the council that the fee I was told I would be responsible to pay to have this street renamed was $3,887. Thankfully, multiple members of city staff have been communicating with me since I last spoke before you, and we have agreed to a modified cost structure, which will be presented for formal approval later in tonight's meeting. Ahead of that discussion, I wanted to highlight what we discussed. The costs that were quoted to cover publishing and mailing notices and recording documents were a combined $575. I do not have issues with these administrative costs. The component of the proposed cost structure that will be most financially burdensome is staff time at $57 an hour, with a maximum potential cost my wife and I may be responsible for of $1,525. I was told this staff time includes reviewing the application, preparing notices and mailings, preparing for and attending a DRB hearing, preparing for and attending a city council meeting, and preparing documents for the county. Respectfully, I feel like I'm being asked to pay for city staff to do their job. This entire situation could have been avoided had city staff responsible for approving street names paused to consider what the name Columbine represents to so many. That all being said, I first raised this concern with city planning staff over 3 months ago, and I am eager to resolve the issue. I appreciate staff members working with me to lower the estimated cost, and I have agreed to these terms. Mayor Fitzgerald and members of the City Council, my ask of you is this. When discussing the proposed cost structure for having this offensive street renamed, I ask you to remind your staff that it will be an individual concerned citizen who will be responsible for paying these costs, and to urge them to remember the moral reasonings behind the request when billing for time spent to right this wrong. I myself have spent a significant amount of time on this matter over the past 3 months, and I have nowhere to send that bill. Again, I do appreciate the city staff members who have been working with me in recent weeks, and I thank you all for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Leahy. And I do want to ask before we move on, I have a question myself for the city manager. Is this coming up during city manager's business?
No, it'll be coming up under legal business.
Okay. And thank you. Okay. And we have one more speaker.
Yes, Mayor Fitzgerald, Stephen Benson.
Please go ahead.
Hello, Council and Mayor. I'm Steve Benson. I live in Daydream Ranch, and want to talk to you a little bit about the plans you have for the camping regulations. My wife and I, we do support housing, mental health, and addictive services, and anything you can do to help get the homeless off of the streets and out of the parks. As some of you may know, my background has a lot to do with park and recreation. I've been on the board, the Park Advisory Board in the 90s, and I did 2 terms up until recently. So I am very vested in the parks, including Wilsonville Memorial Park. My wife and I are in the park nearly every day, sometimes more than once. And we have been finding recently different places that the homeless are living. There's 2 shelters that they've been in. We have found them near the waterfall. We have found them living actually right on the edge of the river. And even recently, this past summer, we had a little scary situation where someone was in the forest shelter, and they were laying down on the concrete, and we discovered they weren't moving, but maybe they're breathing okay. The gentleman was turning gray. We called services, 911, and they didn't even know where the forest shelter was. But the point is, we don't walk in the park to run across people that are scary and dangerous. So we would like you to do anything in your powers to create a better situation for the homeless so they don't wind up in Wilsonville Memorial Park or any other parks in town. After all, we've already invested millions on building that park. I've been on both of the park master plan committees for that park, and we have millions still to spend. But as people start becoming afraid, as one of my neighbors says, they've never walked in the forest because they're worried. We don't want people to start abandoning our parks because the homeless are in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benson, and I appreciate you coming to share your thoughts with us today. If you didn't have a chance to listen to it yet, I would really appreciate being able to talk with you again later, even one-on-one on a phone call or a cup of coffee, after you've had a chance to listen to our work session today.
I saw the work session.
Good, you saw that. So that is, I found a lot of hope in that, in terms of, first of all, reducing the number of people becoming homeless and ways to help them get into housing. So that's one of the aspects that I'm very interested in. And then
we're trying to catch up. I even read the document that the attorney put out.
Good, I appreciate that. And then stay tuned. We're continuing to work on all those things. Thanks for being involved.
You guys have a good evening.
Thank you. So that brings us to councilor comments, liaison reports, and meeting announcements, starting with Council President Ockervall.
Thank you. Yesterday, I was able to attend a lunchtime meeting that was held by our school district in Wilsonville Town Center in a new space that they will be occupying for their adult transition services program. And they shared some information both about the program and what they envision for that space. And I found it really interesting and really helpful to just be better aware of this, the adult transition services program, and some of the opportunities that our community has are, people that are living within Wilsonville, working in Wilsonville, our businesses, to really kind of weave together opportunities for this population of our community. So the adult transition services are, it's a program for former Westland Wilsonville School District students that have maybe received special education services during their time in the K through 12 period, and are now aged between 18 and 21. And the program really focuses on developing job skills and life skills. Our superintendent, Kathy Ludwig, was very proud to share that every single student in the program also takes classes at CCC. And so this is a partnership between Wilsonville businesses, Wilsonville students, and Clackamas Community College. And so it really feels like there's a lot of potential energy that is going on. But one of the things that they are asking for is looking for community, and I have this postcard here. I'll share when we are all in person. So on this postcard, there's a QR code on the back that we can scan, and they're sharing this within the community. But they're calling for people that are interested in helping invest in this new space. Like I mentioned, it is in town center, and so they're very excited to be in amongst all of these businesses and small restaurants or stores, or just kind of a hub of activity in Wilsonville, that it is an adult space for these adult members of our community, young adult members of our community. Formerly, they have been within a school, but now they are in more young adult space. And so that was pretty cool. They're looking for people to serve as mentors, connect with potential employers, and provide jobs to some of the community members that have been through this program. So I will share this postcard, and just wanted to share with you all a little bit about what I learned. And it will be very exciting. They plan on opening their doors once they've done the remodel, I believe at the end of spring. So they'll do another opening then, and maybe we can all get a chance to peek inside. But until then, we can start thinking and sharing with our own networks within the community about the possibilities to help support a pretty impressive program. I also wanted to share that the library is doing a survey right now about their library of things. And this is something that our family really appreciated during the pandemic, because it brought in some new stimulus into our household. But it's been going on at the library for quite a while, and they're kind of assessing what the usage has been and interest and things like that. So on the website, there's a link to fill out the survey about the library of things. And if you haven't used it in the past, check it out for the different opportunities that you can, items you can check out from the library. We've gotten a board game. We've got a radon detector once. There's a sewing supply kit. Some yard games. As our weather gets a little bit better than what we've got now, you might be interested in the yard games. But the variety is broad, and it's pretty cool to check out. So another way that we can share resources among the community members, instead of just, sometimes we don't all need to go out and buy stuff if you're only going to use it once or twice, right? So something to check out. And that's it for me this week. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Council President Ackervall. Councilor Linville.
Well, thank you. I have a very brief report. I was sorry that I was not able to attend the luncheon when GPI was hosting the 100 folks that were reviewing. I was exposed to COVID. Luckily, did not get it, but that kind of was a bit of a conflict. Didn't want to. I was in the time when I needed to be isolating myself. Counselor Barry and I did a presentation on the 13th for the Charbonneau Women's Association, and the staff did an excellent job of helping us with getting some slides. We talked a little bit about where the city is right now, and I think there were a lot of people who were really surprised at the employers that represent the greater number of employees in our city, as well as it was an opportunity for us to kind of talk about the projects that are out there and in the future. So talking about Town Center, the Beckman DIP project, and the pedestrian walkway over I-5. So, and I'll let, I'm sure that Councillor Berry will have some comments about her presentation as well. I was pleased to have the opportunity to attend the GPI Meet the Mayors. It was unfortunate that it was forced to be a Zoom meeting today instead of an in-person, because I was really looking forward to being able to be with that group. There were quite a few people that participated in the Zoom meeting, and it was really good to hear where the priorities were for the other mayors in the cities in the metro area. And one of the things that I thought was really, of course, it's something that's close to my heart, and I appreciate Council President Ockervall's presentation about what is going on with the school district in terms of the workforce training. So but one of the cities, I believe it's the city of Sherwood, has put together it's almost like an ambassadors group that works with their economic development folks to, including their mayor, to meet and recruit the businesses, give them information about land that is out there. And I think it gives, it's always nice when the mayor or the city councilors can meet with prospective developers in the community. So I thought that was a grand idea. Most of the comments were similar to each other in terms of economic development, housing the unhoused citizens, and dealing with issues that relate to some of the unfunded mandates that are coming down. So the next GPI meeting will be for the Small Cities Consortium will be on March 16th, and then the following one will be in April. So that is my report.
Thank you, Councillor Linville. And that brings us to Councillor Berry. I think you're still muted. There you go. No, it still didn't work. It looks like it's off, but there may be a double release needed.
It looks like you're muted on this end.
Let me see
Sorry.
if you can do it.
Can you hear me now?
There, now it's working. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Having technology problems tonight. So I also attended the women's event over at Charbonneau with Councillor Linville, And I just want to commend, she led the event. She was the keynote speaker. And I just gave her a little bit of support, but she did an outstanding job. I was just so impressed and really proud. My part was highlighting the parks around the city. And so I wanted people to know that they have Memorial Park, which is our oldest park. And then I touched base on a few different parks around the city, including the one at the water treatment plant that I don't think very many people are aware of, but I think it's a really nice setting. And then our newest park, which will be at the new Frog Pond West. So then on February 15th, I attended the C4 Metro Subcommittee, and I'm still getting to know all the players. And in that committee, the Clackamas Transportation Planner gave an overview of the roads or the regional transit plan of projects that are being planned, and ODOT also gave an overview of their upcoming projects. Tomorrow, I'm looking forward to attending. I lost Zoom. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. My computer's having problems. I lost the visual with you, but as long as you can hear me.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to joining the city tour tomorrow with the key leaders, and I think that'll be really interesting. And then our city council retreat tomorrow night and Saturday. And I'm signing up for the March 8th League of Oregon Cities budget training. I think that will be really interesting. I wanted to also highlight that this is Black History Month, and the city's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is sponsoring a lecture. So that event will be on Thursday, March 6th, and it's going to be talking about Displacing Black Portland, a history of housing discrimination. And then there's also later that night an event with the Clackamas County Committee is going to be reviewing the regional transportation plan and issues around the ODOT tolling I-5.
Thank you, Councilor Berry. And that brings us to Councilor Dunwell.
Hello. I've had an interesting 2 weeks, actually. On the 15th of, I'm sorry, let me start with the 10th of February, actually. I accompanied Officer Lindstrom from Wilsonville Police Department, who's with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, as we all know, accompanied him on a Friday night patrol. An absolute reinforcement of the value and the training and the expertise that these officers provide our city as public servants, and to make sure that public safety is at the forefront. And public safety goes beyond just speeders and everything else. It's talking to the citizens when someone's in distress. And we had several events during the evening during patrol between the time 4 o'clock when his shift began until about 1:30 when I returned home. And it was something that I would encourage anyone to do because we have an extremely valuable resource, amplified by the fact that it is an element, and they are with Wilsonville, but they are deputies also, and they're part of the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office. So I would encourage other members of City Council, other members as a citizen that would want to engage more closely with them and to learn more about all of the value they bring to our city. And then on the 15th, I actually attended the French Prairie Forum, and we had a speaker, and it was Ethan Struckmeyer, and we also had 3 representatives from the city. We had Mark Ottentott, but we also had 2 representatives from the city planning office, including Miranda Bateshell. Now, the intent of the discussion was to discuss House Bill 2889. Which is regarding housing and amending the land use requirements for local governments regarding urbanization. So there's a lot going on there. And I can tell you that from the French Prairie Forum perspective, and I know individuals in the city, from city planners to Mark Ottendat and to others within the city, are paying very close attention to what happens with that bill and how that will change how we build within the city. And I have to give major commendation to Miranda, because at the end of this presentation, she had some very, very concise, very well thought out and very pertinent questions back to Ethan regarding how this will impact our city. So I think it's something that we need to pay attention to. And then finally, and very quickly, but so importantly, I was actually able to attend all 4 of the Lehan lectures. And what a treasure she is to our city. And I actually saw Councillor Barry there this last lecture, and it was regarding the trees and Graham Oaks in the Graham Oaks Park. She told me things I thought I knew, but I didn't know at all. So it's kind of one of those things, you don't know what you don't know until Charlotte Lehan tells you what's really going on. So it was a wonderful experience. And I know that everything will be on the city website. All of the lectures were recorded. So I recommend that if you missed any of them, to go take a listen.
Thank you, Councillor Berry. It's so great to have such an active council out getting the work done. Thank you all. This brings us to our consent agenda, and I'd like to ask the city attorney to read the agenda title.
Resolution number 3020, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville authorizing the city manager to execute guaranteed maximum price amendment number 1 to the Progressive Design Build Agreement for the Beckman Road Corridor Project with Dapani Sun, a joint venture. And resolution number 3027, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville authorizing the city manager to execute a goods and services contract with Urban Solar for smart bus station electronic display signage.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
Your Honor, I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Is there a second?
Your Honor, I second.
The motion to approve the consent agenda as read has been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to new business, and this is where I'm going to bring up the minutes from the last meeting. There was just a minor correction. There was a reference to sending a letter regarding the industrial lands bill, industrial lands siting project that we've been hearing about for the semiconductor plant siting. There was a reference in the minutes that said we would send a letter to the county commission, and it should have read, we were sending a letter to the
Chairs.
To the committee. The city recorder has corrected those minutes. And I wonder, we haven't ever done this in a long time. How do we make sure that the counselors know exactly what my correction is? Brian or Amanda?
We can send out the amended minutes with the corrected language.
Basically, we're correcting it to the correct recipient. The letter was already sent.
Right. We didn't send it to the county. We sent it to the committee, the co-chairs, the committee.
The co-chairs.
Yeah,
Yes.
correct. Thank you.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended, as described?
Your Honor, since I made the original motion, which was probably confusing, I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Is there any discussion? I have discussion. My discussion is, Councillor Linville, I'm the one who said it the wrong way. You were very clear. So that's my discussion. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to resolution 3063. If the city attorney would please read it.
This is resolution number 3036, a resolution of the city of Wilsonville authorizing acquisition of property and property interests related to construction of the Beckman Road Corridor project.
Thank you. And do we have a staff report on this?
Yeah, Mr. Barrett is right there. There he is.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. How we doing? I have a presentation that I will share. Can you guys see this okay?
Yes.
Council and Mayor, thank you so much for your time together today. My name is Andrew. I am the Capital Engineering Project Manager, and I am going to work to present the Beckman Road Corridor Improvement Project, the first resolution of property acquisition. So just a brief overview. We did go over a project update at the last council meeting. This is a multiple capital improvement projects. There's a bridge, a sanitary sewer line, road widening. We have a progressive design build contract with Tapani Sunt. We're combining all these projects to try to save money and get the project done quicker and to be as efficient with time as we can and limit the amount of impacts to the public. So one of the goals of the project is to build key infrastructure, and we're also going to work to provide mobility and safety improvements to the Beckman dip and the project area you can see on the screen. So this first,
I just have a request of the staff. Could you please admit Councilor Berry back in? We've got these internet issues. Thank you.
She is here via phone, just so you know.
She asked to be readmitted by the Zoom.
Oh. Okay, I don't see her waiting.
Okay.
It says another meeting's in process.
You might have the wrong link. Let me send you the correct one.
Okay, thank you.
Let's just, okay, I think we can continue.
Yeah,
All
go
right.
ahead and continue.
So as I was mentioning, there are going to be several property acquisitions for this project. We're moving very, very quickly with the contractor at the table through the design process. And we have realized that we need to divide up the property acquisition based on the different levels of design that have occurred. So this is the first request of 3. I've got a map that shows generally what the property acquisitions or areas are going to look like. I would like to point out that one of the parcels is the school parcel that we are working on, and that section may end up getting dedicated as part of their school development. A sample acquisition will look generally like this, where there's a property that is touching the right of way as the road gets widened. We're going to have sidewalk utilities or other project parts that will need to take some of the property to build the project. The former city engineer, Nancy Krushower, has been leading the outreach effort with those owners to explain to them sort of what the process is and how things are progressing. So looking forward, like I had sort of mentioned, this first set of acquisitions is for stuff that's going to be on the east side of where the dip is or where the bridge is. The second acquisition or group of acquisitions that will come will be for like driveways, pewees, and some of the bridge work. And the third set of acquisition will be for the roundabout and continuing the pewee or the public utility easement for the widening to occur. So funding is secured for this acquisition, and we're going to, I would like to request an action or a motion, but before I do that, I would like to open it up to questions that the council may have.
Council, any questions? I see Councillor Dunwell has her hand raised. And I'm not hearing you.
Sorry about that. What is the contingency timeframe for weather conditions and things like that that could potentially provide some delays to construction?
At this point, for delays of construction, we do have the contractor at the table, and we could work through different scenarios depending on what those delays might look like. We do have some tight timelines for the construction process, but generally the most critical items have been sort of outlined that are tied to work that will occur during the summertime to avoid some of those delays where the weather is generally more stable. So.
Okay, good. Good. The reason I ask is that, having taken Beckman multiple times in Stafford, that will very quickly become a public conversation piece, so to speak, if there are significant delays. So you are actually being very thoughtful in building that out into the contract.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Linville.
Thank you. I'm not seeing on the parcel list of the property acquisitions any individual personal real property. Am I reading that correctly?
When you're referring to real property, are you speaking like signs or other stuff that might be in those locations?
I'm talking about people who own property adjacent to where the construction is going to be. It looks like it's church property. And then I don't know what the Stafford Meadows Homeowners Association is, if that is an individual or if it's common area.
Yeah, that's the HOA.
That's the
property, yeah.
And the same with the Arbor Crossing Homeowners Association.
Yep.
Okay. So there's not really any, and it seemed to me that so this is mostly for the improvements on the road and the roundabout. Is that correct, for the sidewalks and the roundabout?
So this section here is going to be generally for sidewalks and for utilities. One of the items that's being replaced on parcels 7 and 26 on the map, that is for culvert replacement for Meridian Creek.
Okay. That was my question about what that really was, but it was the culvert. Okay.
But
thank you very much.
There's no individual homeowners, condemnation of individual homeowners on this batch of acquisitions.
Okay.
What's your question?
Super. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Linville. That covered a lot of ground, that question. We've had some good questions already, and I'm not seeing any other questions. There was no pun intended saying that covered a lot of ground, but I guess that was a pun. So we have a draft motion here, and I would like to ask if a member of the council would like to make the motion.
Your Honor, I move to adopt resolution number 3036.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Motion to adopt resolution 3036 has been made. Now, I do see that our slide says 3020. Is that an
It's-
error?
It's 3036 is the resolution number.
Yeah,
Right here on the slide, though.
the slide's wrong. The motion's right.
Thank
I
you.
apologize, council.
That's okay. I just wanted to clarify that. And so we have a motion and a second to adopt resolution number 3036. Is there any discussion? I would just add that I appreciate this detailed staff report and look forward to continuing, updates on this project. It's a really big project that's been in the making for many years. Any other questions from the council? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to city manager's business.
Yes, Mayor, I do have one item, and it's really a conversation or some direction from you all. We talked to the facilitator today for tomorrow night's get together, the training. There's some concern that she might not be able to make it, or some concern about the weather late into the evening. So the options are we can continue on as planned. She has some dates in March we could reschedule to. It's not really critical to the actual goal setting. It's more the assessment that you did, or other options that you might want to consider. So I really just want to know what your individual comfort levels are with getting together tomorrow night, given the temperatures are going to be in the low 20s, and then getting home after that.
So are you, I just want to see if I'm hearing you right. Because our facilitator probably has to drive a longer distance than we do. It's the road, streets and roads.
Yeah, well, not just the facilitator, but your comfort level as well. Saturday, because we're going to be doing it in the day and it's going to get above freezing, I think everything's going to be fine. It's more a question about what your comfort level is, and then the facilitator, in terms of her ability to get there, coming from Portland, might be a little problematic. The freeways were a nightmare today, so.
Are you talking about, sorry, Brian, just to clarify,
Mhm.
are we talking about scrapping Friday and continuing with Saturday, or
Yes.
the whole thing? Oh, okay.
The question is Friday night,
Okay.
that portion of goal setting.
Well, if we, is there a way to go ahead if she is not there? Would she be doing it by Zoom? Are we facilitating it ourselves? How would we do that?
She is integral to it, because the assessment, she's
Yeah.
going to interpret it
What I
and
thought.
walk you through it. And there's no way we could do it by Zoom because we would be at Bella's.
I would recommend that we make that call at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
And just because being out and about today, the roads are drying off very quickly and the temperature is supposed to get up to 40 tomorrow. So once the roads are dry and no more precipitation, the road should be quite passable. Maybe it's because I grew up in the Midwest, but.
Well, I'm from Montana, so I hear
Yeah,
you.
so you know.
I was going to agree with you, because I think at least the forecast is that it's going to be sunny almost all day tomorrow. And I don't anticipate that it would be a real problem. I will have more difficulty. I won't be physically around much for the month of March. So I would like to go ahead if we could possibly do that. And I don't feel uncomfortable driving even late at night, so it's fine.
I agree with this. I'm game for waiting to see how things look at 1 o'clock.
All right. We'll do that.
To Councilor Berry and Council President Ackerville.
I'm fine. If I have concern, I will have my husband drive me, and we will be fine.
Okay.
So it's not a concern.
And Councilor Berry.
I was just checking the weather report, and I think it's going to be fine too. So
Okay.
I think
All right.
we're going to be okay.
And
Right.
if we get a surprise additional storm, well, that's a different thing. Okay, thank you. And is this when we are going to continue with our city attorney's report?
Yes, Mayor. But I'm going to start actually with Mr. Leahy's request regarding the fee structure for the street renaming, and then we'll get into prohibited camping. So as he discussed in public comment, he was here last council meeting asking for a waiver or reduction in the fees, in the fee that was quoted to him for doing the street renaming process. So our fees are set by a resolution that council has adopted. Our planning fees are set by a resolution that council has adopted. So administratively, staff can't change that fee, so that it requires an action by the council. What we did in trying to figure out a cost estimate is, as far as we could tell, from city staff's perspective, we have not processed a street renaming request before. So figuring out a cost estimate was a little bit of a struggle, but what we did was we broke it down into three main components. First was the noticing requirement. So we have to notice in a newspaper, which is the Wilsonville Spokesman. And then we also have to send out mailings. So we looked at kind of the average cost that we see for other types of these processes, how much that cost is. That was $475. And then there's also going to be some county recording documents if it's approved that will be required. And so we estimated that at $100 to be $575. So the real challenge then gets into staff time. So our community development staff, our community development department is funded by the community development fund. It's not general fund money. So how the city pays for that staff is through the collection of things like the planning fees. And so what was instructed for staff to come up with a time was to go with the rate, the fully loaded rate for our least expensive planner, which is our assistant planner position. The assistant planner will not be handling this. This is actually going to be handled by a higher level planning staff member, but given our understanding of the request, the instruction was to go with the assistant planner position cost and not include any planning management fees for their review or the city manager or legal fees that are associated with our review of these documents. So just the assistant planner fee, that fully loaded is at $57, and this planning staff estimated that for the whole process that it would be between 24 and 32 hours was the rough estimate that they came up with. So that put it in a range of approximately $1,400 to $1,800. So we settled at $525 kind of on the lower end, or $1,525 kind of on the lower end to put it at $2,100. But with the understanding that rather than just having Mr. Leahy pay that cost up front, that staff will bill our time and then it'll be the actual costs capped at $2,100. That's what our recommendation to council would be. So, but it's your prerogative. The fees are set by council, so it's your prerogative if you want to choose a different fee or what action you want to take. But essentially what the motion would be to authorize city staff to bill for actual costs incurred for the street renaming application from Mr. Leahy. And our recommendation is to cap that at $2,100.
Thank you, Ms. Guile Hinman. This is a very unique situation. I mean, nobody is kind of coming up with these charges and rules randomly. They're in our system, and there are fees that have to go to the county and so forth. However, this is unique because of this really unfortunate naming that I agree. It brings up a heartbreaking aspect of our time in the United States. And so I'd like to find out if I'd like to see if we could propose I'd like to ask the city manager, is there a way to work a little harder on those fees? I mean, I know you're working hard. I know you worked hard on this, and the staff has spent a lot of time on this, and it started with regulations that are there things that happen in the state and county and all of these things. That's where all this came from. So everybody's really put a lot into this, but I just wonder, is there any other option?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think Amanda covered the important points, and it is extremely unique in that the developer chose the name. Our policies state that if it falls within certain parameters, we don't have any reason to say no. Columbine is a perennial flower that's native to this part. So it met all that criteria. And if staff had even raised objections, our policies, if the developer wanted to proceed, I'm not sure we would be able to say no. Having said all that, we haven't had anything like this before, and trying to lump it into that planning category fee that it's in, even though it does require, I think, a couple of items on city council agenda and one public hearing before DRB. There's a lot of work that's going to go into it, but I would be fine, Mayor, with just capping the planning staff time. Just make it $500, and then the hard charges that we can't avoid, have them pay for that. Just cap it at the total all-in fee for this $1,075. I think we could live with that, just because it is unique, and it is a triggering name for many. We get that. So I think if that's a place you wanted to go, I would feel comfortable with that.
Thank you, Councilor Linville.
Well, I've thought a lot about this as well, and what seems to be different about this situation, in my perspective, is that if this was an individual that was asking for a street to be named something that they wanted, like they wanted it called Brown Street after their grandmother, I think we'd be talking about a different kind of situation. If by this citizen bringing forward the concern, if the city council agrees that the name of the street that the developer has chosen is inappropriate or is something that we as a council would prefer not to have as a name of one of the streets in our community, then I think it becomes a council action rather than responding to a request by a citizen to select and change a name of a street for their purposes. So in my mind, I think about this in terms of saying, what would we do if any of our streets, if the council decided, it came to our attention or by whatever means, even from ourselves, if we decided to change the name of a street in our city for whatever reasons that the council decided was appropriate, we wouldn't probably go out and charge an individual citizen for that by them bringing it to our attention. So I'm a little uncomfortable with trying to have this, it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, because it's really not a situation where the citizen is saying, you know, I want it named after my grandmother or after this developer or after this, you know, I have this reason, which we then would say, well, then if we approve it, it's all on you. You have to pay the whole thing. So I don't know if there's a way that we can, I mean, I would be in favor of this being something that the council decides whether they think it's appropriate or not, and then making the decision about how would we determine the fees if it was a council recommendation.
Well, there's two sets of fees here. There's fees that we can't avoid that are charged by other entities. And then there's internal fees that we do control, but as Amanda stated, the planning department is set up as an enterprise fund, so they live and die on the fees that they collect for the work that they do. So, I mean, if you're talking about a situation where we just pay for the entire cost, that's a different conversation than the recommendation we brought to you. But as Amanda said, this is really, fees are in your bailiwick, so you can go whatever direction you want. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, because I think we've come a long way in terms of this, and this really wasn't the city's fault per se. This is the name that the developer chose. And it met city street naming policies, but whichever way council wants to go, staff will support.
Councilor Berry.
So I tend to agree with Councilor Linville. I remember the presentation that we had at an earlier meeting where the presenter mentioned that, this is a sensitive name that triggers people's emotions, and it especially triggers people's emotions having to do with schools. And that this site, the location is near several schools. And I just feel like that impacts a lot of people. And if the city can absorb costs as much as we can, I would be in favor of that.
Thank you. Did you raise your hand? Oh, Councilor Dunwell.
I did. City attorney and city manager and mayor and council, I tend to move towards the cap. I understand the emotion that this ties to individuals. I also believe we have a responsibility to, as city citizens and as a council, to have a fiduciary responsibility to some of these costs. And interestingly enough, it's not necessarily related, but it is very closely related. The city, the individuals and the students at the Columbine School in Colorado chose not to change the name of their school because they felt that they wanted to move on. And so I think that I actually like to take that line of attack. It's important to be respectful. I love the fact that this is an early change, so the impact is not as significant, but I do believe we have a fiduciary responsibility, and I also believe that that the cap is reasonable.
Thank you, Councilor Berry. And I would add that our citizens, not only do we have a fiduciary responsibility, we will cause difficulties over the years if we are not consistent with the fees. Although with the fact that this is an unusual situation, as Councilor Linville described, I really appreciate that viewpoint. It's not somebody trying to name this after their favorite aunt or grandmother. So I see we have a hand raised by Council President Aukervall and then by our city attorney.
Thank you, but I think actually the city attorney's hand was raised first, so I don't want to step out of order. My question's a little different too.
We always defer to the elected officials.
Well, we might end up looping back then in our conversation, but my question was actually, I mean, this is like we're all saying, this doesn't happen very often, so this is learning opportunity for all of us. When streets are named, does that, like we're saying, names done by the developer, there's criteria, all of this, does that then also go to the DRB as part of plans?
It does, yes.
So our DRB 5-member board all saw this name.
Yeah, well, did they look at the plat that closely to pick out street names? I don't know, but certainly they approved the plat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I was curious about that too, because just how we're framing the conversation and, how did this happen and stuff too. And there's different perceptions on the meaning of a name and what it holds, as we've, already discussed tonight. So I'm glad to hear actually that more eyes are looking at street names, because there's probably many ways that a street name can go sideways, as history has told us. I was just curious what the process generally is for new names.
Thank you, City Attorney Guile Hinman.
I was just wanted to add to, I echo Brian's comment that staff is going to support whatever the direction of council is. I did want to note that I've already been talking with Sean about ways through his application process and what he submits that will reduce the costs, particularly about, since we've never done this before, we're drafting all new findings versus our standard applications where, you know, we kind of do the same findings. That I've talked with him a little bit about how he could structure his application to make sure that those things are, the time to do those things are reduced for our staff as well.
Thank you. Do I have a motion on this matter? I'm going to make a motion. I'm going to make a motion, then we can have more discussion. Just a minute, please. I'm just looking at my math. I move that we structure the fees in a way that addresses the code and the consistency of paying fees, yet it is, as you know, taking a very conservative look at the fees as the city manager described, and actually cutting some of the fees, because the city will experience some expense, so it's sort of meeting them halfway. And there is a $475 publishing fee, a $100 county recording fee, capping the staff costs at $500, with a total to pay the city at $1,075, with the understanding that if staff finds they actually take less time to do that, it could actually be less than $1,075. Is there a second?
I second.
Now, is there any discussion about this motion? Councillor Linville.
I certainly agree that that the applicant would be responsible for those fees that we would have to incur as a result of the change in terms of the recording fees and the roughly the $575. I think we have a lot more discretion in terms of adjusting those other fees, and so I would like it to be, I would like to see that far less.
You said, just so I'm understanding, the hard costs in paying for mail and print and the county recording fees specifically total $575.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we don't have any choice in that. That we have to do, and so I certainly support that portion of your motion.
We're still in the discussion phase. As the maker of the motion, I like your proposal, Councillor Linville, and I will amend the motion for a total fee of $575 to represent the hard costs. And the person who seconded my motion, I believe, has to second my amendment. Or they don't have to, but they're welcome to.
I second your amendment.
Okay, any more discussion? I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor of the motion to set the fees at $575, recognizing the county recording fee and the cost of printing and mailing the required notice, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you for that good discussion. And that brings me to, okay, let's all take a deep breath now, maybe have a glass of water, and let's go back to hearing the staff report that our city attorney put an incredible amount of time into. We want to hear the rest of the research, and our city attorney has gone to a lot of trouble to do this incredible research. I also wanted to add that I know that at the city day that we recently had at the state capitol, Council President Ackerval went to a session on this, which is all a lot of legal aspects. A number of us went to sessions on it at the summer conference of the Oregon Mayors Association, and a number of us have toured various living arrangement, I'm going to call them villages and solutions from the city of everything from the city of Bend to the city of Portland to the city of Salem, and another one in Bend. So we've all done a lot of work here, and I want to recognize that there's more work to be done. And with that, please continue with this report.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and councilors. In the meantime, while we were working on this, I checked with our city recorder. Our next work session, we actually are under time. So I think, especially given that we're already at 8:30, what I will do is I'm going to pick specific policy questions that implicate potential new questions to the community for outreach. So that way, if you do want to do essentially a second survey on some specific targeted issues, that I'm going to ask about those now so I can work on getting that survey out. And then the other questions I can withhold, and then we can talk about at the work session on the 6th, since we've got extra time, if that sounds good for everyone.
Yes.
Seeing head nods. Okay. Oh,
we
yes.
have a comment from Councilor Dunwell.
I'm sorry, quick question. Are you saying that second survey, the follow-up survey, would go out prior to our next work session?
I'm not sure if it would go out prior to, but it just takes time to get to figure out the language of the questions, and then getting our staff to be able to upload it. So it definitely wouldn't have the results out. It might be out on the street by then. Yeah.
I would like to request that council have view of that follow-on survey before it's released.
Okay. Do you want to do that in a regular meeting, or if I send it out to the council in an email and then you provide me direct feedback, would that work?
Email is fine.
Okay.
And I have a clarifying question. Are you going to go through more of the policy questions tonight? Okay, good.
Yeah.
You're just going to have more matter to discuss later on it. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull back up my PowerPoint, but I'm going to jump around a little bit on these policy questions targeted towards if we do a second survey.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen. Okay, so all right, looks like you all can see it. So the first policy question that we started talking about was about the limited hours for camping, and particularly this is there's what I see as potentially two questions if we were to do a survey, if you want to get additional community feedback. One would be appetite for a 24-hour period versus appetite for like an 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. or, like a specific block of time. And then the second question that could be a policy question for a community survey would be regulations being different for vehicle camping versus vehicle camping versus like tent camping. So for example, vehicle camping could have a longer period of time versus tent camping. So let's start with this policy question number 1 about the limited hours for camping, initial feedback, and then if you would like to see some additional outreach through a community survey on that.
I just wanted to clarify, I'm raising my hand for myself, I guess, but the 8 p.m. and I guess we're not deciding on these, we're just understanding these policy points. That's what we're doing here. Okay,
right.
Understanding it. I hear that other cities, I just want to understand, make sure I've got this, as I read your report, as I read this report, I understand that some cities and some commenters to the survey that we did, that you submitted to the Let's Talk Wilsonville, people have said perhaps there could be a more flexible or longer period of time for people to camp in cars than in tents. Is that really what you're saying?
Yeah, so it wasn't through that specific point wasn't necessarily through the community survey. What we heard from the feedback from the outreach that we did in our stakeholder interviews was that one, our unhoused, or the majority of our unhoused population, our residents in Wilsonville, are living in their vehicles, and that vehicles feel less intrusive than tent camping or outdoor camping. And so given that that would be reducing a barrier for the individuals that are our unhoused residents, that people felt like there could be a distinction between the two.
I hear what you're saying now, and I'm just going to make a comment that I am having heard, this is my third time listening to the staff from Clackamas County Housing, and I'm very committed to doing everything I can to help people experiencing homelessness to exit homelessness. So I feel it's our responsibility to work in that direction. I am not, and I want to put everything into working toward having people connect with Clackamas County with the services, as we heard today in the work session. That is a real priority for me. I don't have an answer on what we should do about asking people if we should be more committed to vehicle camping and having it be longer, because I have a concern about being complicit in being codependent in keeping people in a difficult life circumstance. I would rather put time into helping them access services.
Your Honor, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilor.
Well, I've also listened to a few and comments and listened and really read the document, and I think we should ask the question, if we're going out for an additional survey, is should there be different standards for vehicle camping or vehicle housing? It's not really camping, it's really vehicle housing versus camping as however we're going to define it. And I think the difference there is that if there are violations and we tow a vehicle, let's say when a person has gone to work, their home, everything they own is gone. And even though we give them 72 hours notice, if they have difficulties that we just simply don't know about, I think if we're wise about how we write our rules about where vehicles can be and where other camping can be, I think we could probably take care of it in that way. But I guess that would be, I would say that would be one of the other questions to go out and ask is, should there be a different standard for vehicles versus whatever kind of other camping would be.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
And then the other thing that I just have a comment about is, I agree with you, Mayor, about, getting them services. And I think it's also going to be difficult for us to do the 24 hours because of having to keep track of when does the clock start. And I have a little bit of a problem with the 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. just simply because if they are a night worker and they have a job, then there should be some way for them to have some kind of a waiver, or some way to ask for a different hour. So I don't know whether it goes to a day, 1 day, or how that goes, but I don't know if that's a policy question. It's probably not one to go back out and ask. I think we need to find some kind of a resolution among ourselves.
That's a good.
And I don't know what the answer is, but I think we can figure that out.
That's a good point. Thank you. Councillor Dunwell, I'm going to go top to bottom.
Yeah, and Mayor, I am in complete agreement with your statement. And Councillor Linville, I think, everything that you've just said resonates and makes a lot of sense. It's my understanding that if they are camping in an automobile, the automobile must be operable. Is that correct, Amanda? Can we build within an ordinance that the vehicle must be in operable condition?
Yes. The wrinkle, which this is not what you're getting at, but just so you're all aware, the wrinkle, one of the inherent contradictions in state law is that the noticing and process for towing abandoned vehicles, which is not defined in state law what an abandoned vehicle is different than the camping noticing requirements. And so a lot of times what jurisdictions have done, if you look at jurisdictions codes, what they'll do is they'll define an abandoned vehicle as a vehicle that's uninsured, doesn't have current registration. Well, that could then put them under an abandoned vehicle tow versus the camping ordinance, which has implications from a noticing perspective and due process. So I will say the answer to your question is yes. I would advise from a legal liability standpoint that they still be treated under that the noticing requirements as if it were camping. So that way we're making sure that we are doing the most to protect their due process rights.
It's my understanding that if a car is uninsured, it can be immediately towed.
It's a question if somebody's living, if you have evidence of somebody living in it.
Okay.
Councillor Councillor Berry, the order has been changing on the Zoom here. Councillor Berry.
I'm just curious about if we had different regulations for people that are in tents as opposed to who are living in their vehicles. It feels like I don't really know how that would work, but it just feels like if you're being harder on the people with the tents, I mean, the people in the tents who don't have vehicles are probably even more down on their luck. I mean, I would think financially, and it doesn't seem fair that we would be regulating them possibly at a harsher terms. So I'm just curious how that would all work.
Yeah, I would say this concept came up a few different times in the stakeholder interviews, but I mean, there's not a lot of evidence out there of how other jurisdictions have structured their codes, obviously, but nobody has done that. Nobody has made this distinction. So it is untested, which from a legal standpoint, I'd say, creates risk, right?
That's an excellent point, Councillor
Absolutely.
Berry. Thank you. So I love that point. We may not be the ones want to be pioneers on too many things. Council President Akarbal.
Thank you. I think I have a question that's a bit of an overarching question. We're only on policy question 1, but for all of the different points that we'll probably hit, and that is, well, we're trying to figure out how to define this, right? And try to allow for all of these different situations that may happen. And I know some of the examples that we're seeing, it's like, well, there's one thing when it's summer and another thing when, or if it's this temperature or this weather condition or that, or, this area of the city and that. So there's all of these different scenarios and situations that could happen. And on top of that, conditions change. Like we suddenly get lots of snow unexpectedly, or there's a rare heat wave, unseasonally, or whatever it may be. Conditions change too. So when we're going through this task of trying to come up with the best definition for our city, what about when we find that it needs to be changed, or things don't turn out quite like we anticipated, or there's changing to some of the court cases or legal determinations too. So I guess how do all of these definitions go? How are they enacted? How does it work going in the future is one of my questions. And then I agree very much with the mayor's comments that we want a healthy, thriving situation for all of our community members, right? And we also want people to be, if we put rules or these boundaries in place, we want people to be able to follow them too. Right? We don't want to just set up hurdles for people, that's they're gonna, and then it's an exercise of trying to enforce. And we want people to be able to follow what we're the expectations for our community. So do we have feedback from, I know you mentioned the Wilsonville Community Sharing did a survey with people that may have experienced some of these life experiences and have that perspective on what is manageable to even know what the regulation is in place. If it's so, if it's 5 pages long of a definition, it may be hard to know, even with the best intentions, what to comply. So I don't know how we balance all of that. And I'm wondering if we have some guidance from the service providers, from the survey, things like that, because we're gonna have a lot of different scenarios to account for.
Thank you. So given this is policy question number 1, do all these comments that we've made, is this something you take back to your desk, or do we solve it now?
Oh, I will if I need more clarification, I will ask for more clarification. Otherwise, I will take it back to my desk.
So we're ready to
as
go
we're
to
talking
policy
through
question number 2. Excellent points.
Well, so I guess
are we?
I do want to respond to Council President Ackerval and then
good
ask a follow-up question. So this is all going to be in, well, not all of it. Generally speaking, these regulations have to be in our ordinance to be enforced, or in our code to be enforced, which means they're an ordinance, which also means to amend them, you got to go through another ordinance. So it is a laborious process to do changes. Now, that there could be some room of, if there are specific things that we would say we want to pull out and have some more flexibility, we could put in the code that whatever things would be adopted by resolution, so they could be more easily amended. But you are totally right on that. The more complex you make it, the more places that you have to go to find the regulations, the harder it is going to be for people to follow it. And I will say, one of the comments that we did get back in the feedback, and this is people that Lee at Wilsonville Community Sharing knows are currently unhoused. One of the things they said that for locations is that they do want maps and signs. So they want to know how to comply whenever these regulations come up. And so it will be important for these regulations to be clear for law enforcement, code enforcement, service providers, and the individuals who are unhoused as well. So with that, and so the more complex you make it, the harder it is to do that. My one follow-up question is there a general consensus of asking the community about I'll keep it simple, of a 24-hour period versus a specific block of time? And the only reason it says 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. is because that's what Seaside has. That's not, you don't have to adopt that. So, but is there general consensus about asking the community that follow-up question?
Well, sorry to complicate it, but I remember several months ago when you brought us some of these questions or some of these topics. I think I remember that if a city set a certain time, like 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., and they started not being able to enforce it, like, okay, well, we didn't have anybody go check, and so people are camping now until 10 a.m., that it kind of makes it then you're I remember seeing something that your code becomes unenforceable or something like that. And so you did have to spend time managing those hours. And so I guess we'd have to give, if that is true, that I remember that, would we have to give the public all of that context to be able to give us a useful answer?
Yeah, it's not that it becomes unenforceable. What ends up happening when you don't enforce your code is that's when you see congregation occur. So one of the reasons that we don't see as much congregation as you see in other communities is because we do have staff that are, our park staff are out and about and they're communicating with people, our police, our code enforcement, our code compliance. So that's why you don't see congregation occur. But when you have regulations that you're not enforcing, the network of communication is very sophisticated, actually, and that information is shared. So that's why it's important to be able to feel confident that for the most part, you will be able to enforce the regulations you adopt.
Okay.
So could I just make one more comment that I think relates to this before we move on? And that is that I noticed as an addendum to the hours that they talk about what happens if they have to move like 600 feet or one block. So I think we need to somehow talk about that, because it could be that they'll comply with these hours, but then they'll move down one block.
So that is a good point, and the difference between the 24 hours and like a set time. So if somebody's camping at 2 p.m. and you have a regulation they're only allowed to camp from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., you can enforce that regulation. If you have a 24-hour period, and let's say you have a distance requirement of, hey, you got to move a certain amount of distance, then it starts a new 24-hour period. So, so it could kind of be sort of just moving down the street, right?
Right.
So yes, that is a distinction between those two, and that's why you see Bend. And if you it's one of the other policy questions that Bend puts a distance requirement on how far you have to move along.
Councilor Dunwell.
Thank you. And this will be quick. I continue to point myself into the 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. because the Martin and the ruling in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, I understand, was specifically again tied to the right to sleep in the Eighth Amendment. So you are not denying those individuals the right to sleep. And if you are saying 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., there are places that individuals that are households can go during the rest of those hours. It is very difficult to set up a home in a tent with all of the things that you begin to accumulate if you have to move continually. Whereas if you are doing a 24 plus 72, it just from my perspective is that it becomes easier to accumulate more things and it becomes more difficult to move. And particularly for certain individuals that maybe want to take everything they own with them all the time and are continually accumulating things that they find. The 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. says to the individual, you're going to be continually mobile. And at the same time, we're offering them services to move forward with their lives.
That's what what I'm hearing you say has appeal to me too, because it has appeal if it comes with us being able to work with the county and some of the providers and to be able to be there and say, as we heard earlier, sir, we talked the last 3 days and today, and I know it's a lot of trouble to pack up all your things at 8 a.m. Are you ready? Would you like to talk to our service provider about a different way and get into some housing?
Because our goal is to get to zero.
Our goal is to get them out of an unsafe, undignified way of sleeping on the ground or something, and heartbreaking, not a good way for humanity to exist. And we are looking, that this is based on honoring the fact that they do not have a home, they do not have anywhere else to go. How can we help them? They have to voluntarily want the help. So we're just trying to, I believe I agree with Councillor Dunwell on that one. And so maybe what we're all saying is these things, back to your question, Amanda, do we want this to go into another question? What did you hear from us?
I would say on all these where we're talking about sending something back out for questions to the community, that we be very cautious about that you only do that if you're really looking for community input. If council has a consensus and you feel strongly about something like this, I think you just need to give us the direction to go in that direction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cosgrove. Yeah, because we don't have 10 years to work on this.
No, and I will say the consensus I'm starting to hear is a specific time frame, and also what is abundantly clear is that we do also want to be simultaneously talking about the connection to services with Clackamas County.
Yes. And being fair about the vehicle and the tent. That person who today doesn't have a place to live, we don't want to make it. I appreciate Councillor Barry's point that it's not, we don't want to differentiate how that happened or if they have a car or not.
Okay, I am going to skip ahead because most of these I think we can talk about on the 6th. Okay, so let's talk about the private property camping program. One of the things that was, so I'll back up, and what you see in jurisdictions that have a private property camping program is they have property owners either sign up through an application process, or there's some way that the city knows there's a designated private property is opting into this camping program. So there's some type of like written document for that. It differs in different jurisdictions what that looks like. It puts the responsibility on the property owner, not the individual who's going to be living on the property owner's property, to provide sanitation and water. So making sure that the basic needs are being met. It's typically for a short duration. So I've seen anywhere from 90 days to 6 months to a year where an individual is allowed to live on the property. And what you also will see is the cities will designate like either it's commercial industrial lands have like a certain, a property can have so many, usually it's limited to 3. If they allow it in residential areas, which some cities do and some cities don't, it's limited to only 1. And so it really does kind of put the onus on the property owner. And where you really see this being implemented is generally with charitable organizations. So churches or service providers will allow people to it's usually within a vehicle, but camp on their property. And on the questionnaire, the respondents were really split. There were people who were very much not in favor of it, and then there were people who are open to considering it. With the interviewees, they were also pretty split. Some of the service providers said they absolutely would not provide this. And then other service providers said, yes, if there was a way to, you know, kind of have lower barriers to do this sort of thing, they would totally be open to it. So this is not required by state law because we're talking about private property camping, and all the mandates are about public camping on public property, but this is something that you see in other communities pretty frequently. And so it's something that we could, if we wanted to do another questionnaire, we could provide more information about what these kind of programs look like and then get feedback. Yes, Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm raising my hand again. I had a question. So if there were an organization that maybe is one of these providers that Clackamas County Vahid Brown was describing, and they were connecting with Clackamas County for the services. From what little I know about it, that sounds like a reasonable way to do that. Maybe we can describe that and why. It sounds to me like a way to help more people get to a better place and get closer to transitional and permanent housing. And then the other comment I've been meaning to ask or question is there a place in any of this? Probably not, but is there a place in any of this for giving, when you talk about private property, providing a voucher to stay in a motel and have services come and talk with you? So it's not like, okay, here, now you can live in the motel, but I know that only works if you have services connected. So does that fit into any of the private property? It's not camping, it's using a motel room instead of sleeping on the ground in a tent.
Do you mean that the property owner, like that a private entity would provide the voucher, or are you talking about the city providing the voucher?
The city. It could be either or both, but I just wonder, we're talking about if we have enough beds for people, back to this law, like your city has to be able to provide enough beds for those persons who are houseless. Is one of the ways to provide a bed a voucher to a motel? And in my view, I would only want to consider that if it was connected to somebody coming to visit you from it's like from Clackamas County to, again, do all of the conversations and connect them to services.
Well,
I just haven't heard the voucher system mentioned in any of this.
Well, can I ask a clarifying question? Because I don't think that's what the Circuit Court ruling said. I just want to ask Amanda, is the requirement that you have to have beds, or is it the requirement is that you can't criminalize camping by telling people they can't camp without giving them someplace else to go?
So this is one of the nuances of this case, of these cases, that is very difficult that makes it so challenging for jurisdictions. So essentially what they say is, if you do not have enough shelter beds, you cannot prohibit camping outright. Now, the problem with these cases is they don't contemplate all the myriad of ways that jurisdictions are now providing places for people to go.
Okay.
And so there's really two questions. One and it's in my staff report of like, these questions we don't have an answer to. One is, does it have to be a certified HUD shelter? The the Oregon Federal District Court specifically talked about HUD certified shelters. So anything other than that, does that not count? We don't know. The Ninth Circuit did not latch on to the HUD certified shelter issue, because in both the jurisdictions that they were looking at, there were basically no beds. And then the second issue is, if there are beds in Clackamas County, but not in Wilsonville, and we can provide transportation to those places, and there are beds available, can we just ban camping? That is also unresolved. Now, I feel like you can make a pretty good argument if you have transportation available and in the county there are beds available. I think you can make a pretty good argument, and I think courts would be sympathetic to the fact that an effort's obviously being made if there's beds available. So I'd feel more confident about that than trying to outright ban camping with providing vouchers.
That's why I wanted to ask the question, just for clarification. And so
Yeah.
the voucher could be an Uber ride to those Clackamas County certified shelters as well.
It could be that.
Okay.
Thank you. And so here is Counselor Linville has her hand up.
Well, yeah, I have just a little response. I kind of made the assumption in reading the report, the staff report and the others, that we're doing this on the presumption that we would never have enough beds. And so as a result of that, we are coming up with reasons why, limitations on what we can do, what people can do in terms of camping. So, I mean, if we had enough beds, we wouldn't be probably doing this.
Correct.
The thing about the private property issue that I just wonder a little bit about is what about, first of all, what needs to be tied to this is, are we going to allow camping in residential areas? Because that means, well, I could have somebody who I allow to camp on my front yard. So it ties into those restrictions about whether we would allow it in residential areas. The other question that I wonder a little bit about has to do with, well, what if it's a situation where someone has a camper on their piece of property that is within the city limits, but it's a fairly sizable piece of property, and they're just letting some people live there? Does that mean that, because I think we have some of that going on already, where they allow them to come into the house to go to the bathroom or take a shower, but they live in a camper or a motorhome on the property. So that, my question is, are we talking about that? I mean, would that come under, or are we better off to just be silent on the private property issue and then use our city codes to enforce infractions that might occur, like if they're not keeping their property up, or if it's, trash all over everywhere, or whatever? So I think it's those two, that real question. I think when I think about, a church allowing some people to camp there overnight, in an emergency situation, that sounds different to me than somebody who owns a piece of property, owns a what I would consider a camping situation, and then does so with their own private property. So how does that work?
So I guess let me parse it out. If we stayed silent, you are exactly right. There are other provisions of our code, like under our nuisance code provisions and the like, that could regulate issues that we see coming up. One of the main issues with, particularly when you see RVs or if people, so unsheltered living basically doesn't necessarily mean you're sleeping just out on the street. It means that you could be in a circumstance where you are living in something that is not, it's not meant to be lived in. So a car. So, so then you can get into some other code issues when people are living in there and you're allowing people to live in those types of conditions on your property, potentially. So, but you're right. I mean, the reality is I don't know, but at least from the legal department, I have not seen an issue that I've dealt with where we're enforcing something against a property owner for having a camper on their site. Now, that's not to say another department isn't, but I haven't personally dealt with that.
And then the question is, now, does that put that, now, if we put this piece in there, would that then force the city to start to regulate that?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I have a related question. Maybe it's on another one of your policies about private property camping. Have you ever seen a situation where, to make this more contained, if a city leased a particular lot or a particular, even parking lot outside of a church, and the city leased that, and it's that one particular place where this camping would be allowed? Is that part of what you're asking here, or totally different?
Totally different.
Okay, so I agree with Councillor Linville that this is a difficult avenue right here, and I think if I go, it makes me feel like it could lead from the compassionate viewpoint. If our principle is that we want to be a city that is helping Oregonians, we want to be built for zero. We want fewer people going into homelessness, and we want an off-ramp for people to get out of homelessness using these services that we heard about. I think if we did what we have on number 7, it would make it really hard to do that, because it would be all over the place. And I did hear Mayor Wheeler today talking about how in Portland they have hundreds, he said hundreds of encampments, and it's we've seen it. They cannot send enough people out to talk to them and help them because it's too dispersed. So this feels like it could become that dispersed situation that is very difficult to service and help.
And just one other comment. It seems to me the whole purpose of what we're doing is regulating camping on public property in this code. And now we're getting, this one has the potential of then moving into regulating private property.
Right, exactly. So
and we have enough to do with the public.
I was going to say, so this can be, no pun intended, we can parking lot this as well. This isn't something that has to be decided by July 1. So even if there is an appetite to potentially consider this at some point, we could leave it out of what we're talking about for the July 1 requirements.
Okay, back to Mr. Cosgrove's point about making progress here. I personally am not hearing an appetite to do this. I don't have one. I think it's buying more problems and being codependent in getting people in worse situations.
Yep.
I'm just afraid we'd bite off a little bit more than we can manage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd opt for parking it and not going back out and asking the public about it if it's not something that we really want to implement, or we want to consider at this point.
Got enough?
Yeah, you all are rocking this. So you're making my job actually easier. I love it. So those were the is that me or is that somebody
I'm
else?
sorry, wait, is somebody else have their hand up and I missed it?
Councillor Berry was saying something.
I'm sorry.
I was just saying that I agree that we can do this later.
And I think Councillor Linville, you still have your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. I have enough trouble seeing when hands are. So.
Okay, so it sounds like those were the main things that I was going to bring back for a survey or a questionnaire. So it sounds like we don't need one, is what I'm hearing. Councillor Dunwell, is there something else?
Yeah,
I know you and I had talked about the one question, and I'm wondering if it's worth it to do that if we're not opening up anything else.
I'm in agreement with you, Amanda. I believe that you've given us a deep enough understanding of what what we have in front of us. And I also believe that the presentation from Clackamas County today was quite eye-opening. And Mayor, as you're continuing on your learning tour of really getting to dive deep into this with some of these other mayors, I do believe that we will have some really great recommendations. I'm really pleased that we've had city input so far. I don't believe there's need for an additional survey.
Okay, great. So what I think I'll do is I will finish with my question 1A, so then I can say all of question 1 is done, and then I'll bring the others back. So question, or not 1A, but question 1 continued, is about whether to keep the parks closed at night. So our city parks close at 10 p.m. and they open at 6 a.m. under our code, our parks code regulations. The general consensus from both the survey and from the outreach done was that there's a desire to keep most, if not all, the parks closed. There was some discussion about potentially Boone's Ferry Park, but it was more of a, if we have to open up a park, they'd rather have it be Boone's Ferry Park than Memorial Park. And also Parks and Trails ranked the 3rd lowest for suitability for camping. And the next screen that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to try and blow this up if I can. Let me go back to the legend actually. So just so you can familiarize yourself, the green is city-owned parks and city-owned, and the yellow. So the green and yellow are city-owned. The orange is other city-owned properties, and then there's other green spaces that aren't city-owned. So anything that's not city-owned, not part of this conversation. So it's really the green, yellow, and orange that we're looking at as far as city-owned properties. But you can kind of see where particularly, Memorial Park's a big swath over here, and then we've got the Beckman Creek corridor over that's in the yellow. And then I also wanted to show you all, this is a spreadsheet from our parks department. So there are currently HOA parks, but there will come a time when some of those HOA parks are going to be taken over by the city. So all of these down here in orange, these are parks that are currently HOA owned, but they are planned to be taken over by the city at some point in time. So we've got parks that range from being taken over in 2023 all the way through 2029 right now. So I'm going to go back to the policy question. There we go. And happy to take some comments on whether to keep parks closed at night.
Council President Ockervall, we haven't heard from her for a while.
Okay, but come back to me after we do question 1. I want to return to the map after we discuss question 1.
Oh, you don't want to go right now?
No, we'll just do question 1 and then call on me right after that. And
Councilor Dunwell. Oh, you're muted. Can't hear you.
Been a long night. Yeah, my question is actually tied to the map too, but just when you get back to that, have you outlined which of those parks are within close proximity to a residential area?
Now I gotta unmute. Pretty much all of them are going to be next to residential areas.
I would say with the exception of Town Center Park.
Yeah, true. Well, but there's apartments right next to it. So.
Yeah, but I mean, we're not talking like a residential neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the only other one, which it's a rural residential, but the out on the east side here, which is it's currently vacant, but is going to be a city park. That is in Frog Pond South. So that will be residential, but right now, obviously, we're in the planning phase of that.
Can I just clarify the narrow, I believe is the question you're asking, should we keep our parks closed at night?
Yes.
Correct.
My answer is yes. Now I'll call on Council President Ockervall.
I'm being hypocritical here because I was like, no, come back to me. But I think my answer is yes as well. My question, which I'll just go ahead and throw out there now, is I mean, I understand from reading about the case material is we cannot define it to such extreme that there is no place that is suitable to be, correct? So like I'm looking at this map and I would agree, okay, let's keep the parks closed at night. Okay, and so then that takes out the green area and the blue area is already taken out. And then we have the natural areas. So we're looking at orange and yellow. And I'm curious, of that orange and yellow, how much of the orange and yellow is SROZ? Or maybe we have other environmental concerns with people being, you know, in that area. And then are we turning into this situation where we have defined it so tightly that we don't have a place? But I guess if I could see the map with that overlay and know that we are not saying you have to be on this 10 by 20 square foot area and that's the only place or something, you know, because I think we'll get into trouble legally if we do that.
Right. Yeah. So I do know like some of these areas, like if you look at this corner, this is Beckman Road right here. Like I know this is wetland remediation. So yes, there are SROZ areas that are overlaying this. So I can get that map made. That's not a problem. What this doesn't show, and I mean, because I do want to be frank about what we're talking about here. What we have, and it's one of the policy questions, is we do have parking lots at, you know, at city facilities like City Hall, the library, over at the community center, over at Smart, and also any public right-of-way sidewalks that are, you know, if you eliminate the residential areas, so industrial and commercial areas, those would also all be open to potentially, if that was the will of the council. So we're talking about city-owned property, but I'm not showing any of the right-of-way, which that would be inclusive in this discussion.
But the city-owned right-of-way is not a park.
No, it's the street. It's the streets and sidewalks.
So
this is just basically a map of parks and parcels that the city owns.
Yeah.
It doesn't include the parking lots that Amanda had mentioned earlier.
No, well, it does. Like over here in Town Center Loop, that's City Hall right there, and
okay,
and the little swath of next to the Kaiser Permanente
I think
lot.
Councilor Linville has her hand up.
I will lower my hand. I agree with you about keeping the parks closed at night. And I think what that says to me is that substantively, we're saying camping will not be allowed in our city parks. Because if we're going to prohibit it during hours,
yeah,
I mean, it would not, I mean, if it's 8 to whatever, I mean, we're in essence saying we're not going to allow camping in our parks. And
well, during certain hours, there's nothing precluding somebody from going into a city park and, you know, pitching a tent during the normal park hours and sleeping if they want to.
Yep. I was going to say that Brian's point is exactly right. So as we say, we cannot regulate how you recreate. So what I always think about as a comparison is if there's a soccer tournament going on and somebody wants to put up a shade tent while they're sitting at a soccer tournament, we got to let someone else put up a shade tent too.
Well, I get that. But what we were saying on the hours is that we were limiting camping from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So how could it be during regular hours that the park is open?
Those are two different issues. One is regarding in general, the other is specific to parks.
So let's use 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. because for everything that we're discussing, because that'll be easy since that's our park regulations. You could close parks from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. like we do, and you could open up other city properties, i.e. the parking lots are city right of way from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. as the places people can go at that time.
Yeah.
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 And, also, the thing that concerns me about saying parks are fine, it gets back to a cruelty or a very unhealthy, very disadvantaged situation for people, because as I heard from Mayor Wheeler, when they are so dispersed over big acreages and lots of places, it's very, very difficult to give them the help that you want to give them. You can't find enough people to hire to go talk to them, as we heard Clackamas County. So the one thing that bothers me about, some big, lots of different places in parks, look how big it is I think we would be not helping people. Councilor Berry.
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
I switched computers. I don't think I would be in favor of having camping in the parklands. I do have an idea that we might want to consider. Earlier, we had the presentation about the building that the city owns that is right next to the community share and near the police station. That parking lot might be a good place. It has easy access to the roads and to the highway. And if we demolish the building, then there's even more space.
All right.
Yeah, I think we could probably find places where we could approve them and still keep our parks closed at night.
And manage them and bring services to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a really good conversation with the library board yesterday about the parking lots, there's essentially 3 different kind of parking lots at the library, about what that could look like, and bringing some sanitation there, and it was a really good conversation about how we could structure that. And something the interdepartmental staff team are going to continue to talk about is exactly this point. So yes, Councilor Berry, that's a good note.
So I think one of the other things we need to remember is that I think in your comments too, and I've heard it several times, is that when you're homeless, you don't want to be out there in front of everybody. It's not where you really would prefer to be. So I think we need to be sensitive to that in select areas where there is a degree of at least discretion. I won't say privacy, because I don't think that's appropriate, but I think discretion.
In other words, a corner of the parking lot right in front of City Hall would be very completely indiscreet and not good for that person. It's too much in the front of everything. I hear what you're saying.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing, the consensus is yes, keep the parks closed at night. And what I can do for the March 6th meeting is I can bring back a map that overlays the SROZ, and also I can talk to GIS about doing some mapping of our rights of way that are not in residentially zoned areas. So you can see that as well.
Perfect.
So I think this is a good, and Councilor Dunwell. I think you're on mute.
Yeah. I do just have one comment that I know I don't believe has been brought up at this point, and I'm going to bring up the issue of public safety. I do believe that it's critical we take that into consideration no matter where we place our homeless, because we know that there are those that are there because of the situations that have come up in their life that are very unfortunate. But we also know that there's a certain segment of the population that is homeless that can not necessarily be good neighbors, even if it's just for a night. So I do believe that we need to take public safety into consideration. And Amanda and you and I spoke about that to a certain degree on the phone too.
Great point.
Thank you for that. And thank you all. This has been, I actually am so thankful for Clackamas County coming and giving that presentation and for all of your comments tonight. I do think it's going to help make this policy the best we can make it, right? And so what I will do is I will be coming back on March 6th to go over the other policy questions. And then at your March 20th council meeting is when you're going to see some first drafts of code language to get some reactions.
So does that mean that you've got enough for today to keep making oh, here's Council President Ockervall.
Sorry, one more thing. When you bring back another map with additional layers on it, if you can also like drop a pin at the schools, because I know that came back in the survey as well as the residential area was the schools. And so I don't know if we want to drop a pin, do a radius around it, or highlight, we could get a really cluttered map. But if we highlighted like some of the safe routes to school or something like this too, so we know where some of the foot traffic to and from the schools are going, that might be nice as well.
If there's anything I've learned throughout my time at Wilsonville, our GIS team is amazing and very good at making maps. So I'm sure it might not be all in one, but I'm sure we can get that information.
Well, one more thing along those lines, there were to even clutter the map more. The survey came back with a couple of, there was a range of things that were sensitive. So maybe the couple of areas or points that are as sensitive, kind of close or high sensitivity, schools, some I don't know, daycare. There were some other things like that. Make sure, as long as we're doing it, let's see where those are. Did I see one more?
We'll do that.
Okay, I think we might be getting kind of tired. I know I am.
I think we have urban renewal.
We do. I was just wanting to see if you wanted to put in another hour on this, or do you want to go to urban renewal? I think we're good to go to urban renewal. Amanda, thank you very much. And thank you for bringing in Clackamas County, Vahid Brown and Adam Brown. I don't know why they have the same last name, but they are amazing and they work so hard. And I really appreciate the chance to give them some kudos. Because as you saw from all those statistics, Clackamas County has been opening up housing and they aren't even finished. And the most amazing thing, they don't even have all of the housing open. Probably the most amazing thing I heard tonight was, I still can't even believe it. They don't have a waiting list. I want to help them do more of what they're doing. So with that, I think that, is it true that we have covered legal business? Okay.
Yes, thanks, Mayor.
And I believe we're ready to adjourn the meeting. Is that correct? If I missed anything? I'm just about to adjourn the meeting. Would you like to take 5 minutes before we reconvene as members of the Urban Renewal Agency, or just reconvene right away?
I was going to say, Mayor, I think everything is on consent except for
Go
just
right
that.
through. Okay.
Except for that one.
City Council meeting is adjourned at 9:33 p.m. Calling to order a meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency at 9:33 p.m. on February 22nd. And could the agency recorder please call the roll?
Member Barry?
Here.
Member Linville?
Here.
Member Ockervall?
Here.
Member Dunwell?
Here.
Chair Fitzgerald?
Here. Do I have a motion to approve the following order of agenda?
I I'm sorry. It's getting late for all. I move to approve the order of agenda.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Will the agency, citizen input, do we have anyone wishing to provide input? Anyone waiting?
We do not, Member Fitzgerald.
Thank you. I'm so glad to have learned that I do not have to read that if no one is here. That brings us to the consent agenda. Would the city attorney please read it?
URA resolution number 334, a resolution of the Urban Renewal Agency of the City of Wilsonville authorizing acquisition of property and property interests related to construction of the Beckman Road Corridor project. URA resolution 335, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville Urban Renewal Agency authorizing the city manager to execute guaranteed maximum price amendment number 1 to the Progressive Design Build agreement for the Beckman Road Corridor project with Tapani Sunt, a joint venture. URA resolution number 343, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville Urban Renewal Agency authorizing the termination of tax increment collection for the year 2000 plan, and minutes of the January 5, 2023 Urban Renewal Agency meeting.
Thank you. I'm a little punchy too. Did I ask for a motion to approve this yet? No. May I, Councilor Linville, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
Yes. So I just have a question. Oh, okay. I move to adopt the consent agenda as read.
Councilor Berry, do I have a second?
Seconded.
The motion to adopt the consent agenda as read has been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Is there any new business? Whoa. The Urban Renewal Agency meeting is now adjourned at 9:36 p.m.